In a rush of wind, golden light flashed in front of the middle-aged man and the gold flame stone suddenly flew through the air. Slow to react, he reached out to grab it in his alarm, but the gold flame stone flew out in a streak of light and into Han Li's grasp. In that next moment, all of those present were stunned by what they saw. Han Li was holding the stone in a single hand and was carefully examining it while ignoring everyone else. The middle-aged man's complexion turned pale with rage. He eerily stared at Han Li and uttered, "Give that to me and I'll let you live if you cut off your arm." After Monarch's soul divergence confirmed the gold flame stone was genuine, Han Li put it in his storage pouch with a flip of his hand. He then smiled towards the middle-aged man and said with an indifferent tone, "I also want this item. But I don't wish to give it to you or cripple myself. Would it be better for fellow Taoists to just return without raising a scene?" When the middle-aged man heard this, he grew even more furious and his hands tightened into fists. A foot-wide layer of white light suddenly shined around him as he was about to take action. When the icy woman at his side saw this, she felt there was something amiss about Han Li. Using the language of the Great Jin, she asked, "Commander Gu, what's the matter? What is that strange item? If it isn't important, don't stir up any trouble." When the middle-aged man heard this, he hesitated before sending her a voice transmission. When she heard this, she revealed an astonished expression. Her expression froze and she asked, "Is that true? Are you not mistaken?" "I am absolutely certain I am correct," the middle-aged man said with excitement. "You should also know I was originally a toolsmith and have looked through the Supreme Stone records countless times as a result. If we bring this wondrous treasure back to the palace master, the merit we would receive would be far beyond what we would gain from returning the traitor and the snow crystal pearl." When the woman heard this, she looked at Han Li once more and verified he was truly only a Foundation establishment cultivator. A cold light then flickered from her eyes and her heart was filled with killing intent. With a raised brow, the icy woman commanded, "Attack. Kill all of the Soaring Tribe's members. Leave no witnesses. The Endless Sky Temple won't become hostile with our 9 Immortals Palace over a few low-grade cultivators and a couple hundred mortals. At worst, we'll merely compensate them for a fraction of the price." She then opened her mouth and spat out a streak of silver light, arriving in front of a Soaring Tribe's Foundation establishment cultivator in an instant. Although the Soaring Tribe's cultivator was protected by a blue barrier, it wasn't able to block the full-powered strike of a core formation cultivator. As a result, a scream sounded out and he was split into two. The silver streak circled once in the air to reveal itself as a sparkling white dagger that was about a foot long. As for the Foundation establishment cultivators from the Great Jin, they immediately complied with the woman's orders and released their magic tools, attacking the remaining Soaring Tribe's cultivators. As for the mortals farther away, they were left alone for the time being since they couldn't run. When the Soaring Tribe's cultivators saw the Great Jin cultivators attacking them, they felt both alarm and fury. However, one of them was at early Foundation establishment stage while the other two were at Qi condensation stage. Against the joint attacks of the 6 Great Jin Foundation establishment cultivators, they were only able to resist for only a moment before being killed. After they were dealt with, the Great Jin Foundation establishment cultivators approached Feng Yu's carriage to deal with him. The icy woman showed indifference at the sight of this as she stood on the bat. Han Li muttered to himself as he looked down at the corpse of the burly youth that was originally in possession of the snow crystal pearl. He had wished to save the youth and ask about the Great Jin, but from his black-purple complexion, it appeared he committed suicide with poison. Knowing this calamity would be difficult to escape from, he swallowed a fierce poison before the battle. In case he was captured, he wouldn't have any fear of having his soul being refined, but given how fast his soul dissipated, it seemed he had done something else as well. Han Li shook his head, feeling at a loss of whether he should laugh or cry. What a shock it would have been if he had somehow found out that Han Li would have saved him after he arrived in the afterlife. Regardless, Han Li had no relationship to his person and didn't feel particularly strongly over the matter. Then he flicked a small fireball at the youth's corpse, turning it into ash without much further thought. A moment later, the cloud of devilish qi returned. Han Li's second nascent soul waved the small black flag in its hand and absorbed all of the devilish qi into it. Then it flew a circle above Han Li before disappearing into the top of his head. He then looked around and saw the Soaring Tribe's mortals looking at him with fear. "Let's not stay here any longer. Follow me. You still need to tell me the location of the secret cave before you die. Han Li spoke at one of the carriages. Feng Yu slowly emerged from the carriage with his head wearing a cloak. Then with a voice faintly carrying a trace of excitement he said, "So you were actually an elder of the Yin-sifting sect. It was no wonder you were able to easily kill that traitor Feng Zhen and possessed a medicine as rare as the vast essence pill." Yin-sifting sect elder? I'll speak of the matter later. Go. Han Li coldly chuckled and then took to the sky on a flying sword. Feng Yu hesitated for a moment before closely following after him. Two streaks lit the sky and slowly departed into the distance. At that moment the soaring tribe mortals finally gathered the courage to reform their caravan. When their leaders met face to face they wore a bitter expression. All of the immortals they hired were either dead or gone. They were still confused over what had happened to them. Over the next few days the matter was eventually made known. Although the cultivators were low-grade, their deaths were still significant, particularly because it involved cultivators of the Great Gene. The cultivators of a few temples immediately responded after hearing of the news. After a bit of investigation, they recognized the killer of the Great Gene cultivators was that same foreign cultivator that had slain several of their immortals. From what the mortals saw and given the cultivators who perished were from the Great Gene, the identity of this foreign cultivator was made known to be an elder of one of the 10 grand sects of the Great Gene, the Yin-sifting sect. In their previous battles the foreign cultivator clearly hadn't made full use of his powers as he still held his sect protection treasure in reserve. But now that the Yin-sifting sect flag was discovered in his possession, it was now made clear the foreign cultivator was amongst the most important elders in the Yin-sifting sect. The soaring tribe's immortals that fought against him trembled when they found out about this. At that moment, a few soaring tribes immortals came to a conclusion on why the foreign cultivator had appeared in the endless sky plains and was attacking them with such strength. In the Holy War several tens of years ago the Yin-sifting sect was supporting the Milan. Could it be that the Yin-sifting sect elder had infiltrated deep into the endless sky plains for revenge over the Milan tribe's defeat, or was it some other conspiracy? This reasoning made just enough sense to justify his actions. With a large clap, the silver thread struck the ice wall and created a dense grouping of holes. It nearly appeared as if the ice wall was on the verge of collapsing from the damage. When Han Li saw this, he raised his hand and struck the ice wall with a spell seal. Purple light flowed across the ice wall and released an astonishing glacial qi. Not only was the damage from the silver threads repaired, but the wall condensed another layer of thick purple ice around it, quickly turning it even more difficult to destroy. In addition, the glacial qi turned into purple flames in the blink of an eye and spread across the silver threads towards the embroidered scarf magic treasure. It appeared almost as if thin purple snakes were fiercely pouncing towards it. With an expression changed from shock, the saintess thought, "What is this vicious technique?" Despite her surprise, her actions didn't slow in the slightest. She held her hands in an incantation gesture and then gracefully pointed at the embroidered scarf floating in the air. The portrait of the silver silkworm opened its mouth once more and spat out a puff of white flame. It traveled along the silver threads and rushed towards the purple flames to meet their attack. Both of the flames quickly struck each other on the silver threads and the purple-white flames weaved together, and after a short moment, the purple flames massively overtook the white flames and quickly gained ground. When the saintess saw this, she unconsciously frowned and spoke a few words in an ancient language. Suddenly, the soaring sky beast let out a low roar from underneath her and spat a stream of azure flames to merge with the white flames. Joined together, the azure-white flames were able to block the purple ice flames for the time being. In the gap of delay, the saintess waved her hand and summoned an octagonal metal pendant into her grasp before tossing it into the air. The metal pendant then instantly transformed into a huge bagua diagram, blazing with scarlet flames, and launched itself in Han Li's direction. Han Li curled his lips at the sight of this. Without a change of expression, thunder clapped from his back, summoning a pair of silver wings. As the bagua diagram was about to strike him, he blurred and disappeared in a flash of silver lightning. With the bagua diagram missing its mark, Han Li reappeared over 100 meters away with a flap of his wings before disappearing once more. Lightning movement. When the saintess saw Han Li draw closer to her, she muttered the name of this famed technique with a solemn expression. She then grasped her hands in an ancient incantation gesture and had the soaring sky beast spit out a vast sea of white mist before they quickly took cover within it. In the blink of an eye, they completely disappeared into the mist. Another clap of thunder soon rang out and Han Li reappeared at the mist side with an expression of surprise. He wasn't able to find any trace of the Saintess within the white mist as it completely blocked his spiritual sense from entering it. However, he didn't have the time to allow the two to continue hiding away. Han Li waved his hand with an icy expression, summoning an ancient purple mirror in front of him. Then with the mirror held in his hands, he poured the entirety of his spiritual power into it, causing it to pulse with light and release a beam of sparkling purple light through the mist. The beam of purple light caused the white mist to roil before soon scattering it away, soon to leave no further cover for the Saintess. But at that moment, an azure flame spat out from a portion of the remaining mist, blocking the purple light from pressing any further. Han Li quickly focused on the source of this flame and faintly saw the lone silhouette of the endless sky beast deep in the mist. However, there was no trace of the Saintess standing on top of it. Han Li rejoiced at the sight. He could only point at the blue light shield and have it wrap around him in a large blue barrier. As soon as the sand and blue light barrier made contact, the azure sand brilliantly shined and massively expanded in size, each grain turning into the size of a boulder as it smashed down on the blue light barrier. A series of booms echoed through the air. No matter how formidable the blue light barrier may be, it wasn't able to withstand such a vast number of powerful strikes. In an instant it blurred and dimmed. In addition, the cloud of sand split into two and transformed into two flood dragons, wrapping around the light barrier to restrict Han Li. Without another thought, Han Li opened his mouth and spat out a small cauldron. He flicked his finger against it and a blue icy flame appeared on its surface. It was the divine spirit treasure he cultivated to its first layer, the Heaven Void Cauldron. Although he was only able to make use of only a small portion of the cauldron's power, Han Li had no choice but to use it after being pushed to the brink. He swept his hand past the surface of the cauldron and a wave of blue light flew out from it, tightly wrapping around him. Han Li then spread out his arms and flicked his fingers at the two sand flood dragons. A dozen streaks of azure sword chi were released, weaving through the air and fiercely striking the flood dragons. As a result, a dozen thumb-sized holes appeared in the flood dragons' heads but to little effect. Han Li felt his heart grow tense. Just as he thought to avoid the incoming attacks, his body felt as heavy as a mountain and his actions were brought to a standstill, restricting his movements in their entirety. The flood dragons appeared before him and charged into him, collapsing into clouds of sand on impact in two muffled groans. Then with bright light glowing around Han Li's body, the cloud of sands condensed into a giant cocoon around him, soundly sealing him inside. The Saintess had been initially shocked when Han Li brought out a small cauldron similar to her own holy cauldron, but when she saw how easily Han Li had been trapped by the sand, she simply smiled. The might of the holy cauldron's sand was immensely powerful. So long as someone was trapped in it, they would be completely disabled and at her mercy. Even late nascent soul cultivators wouldn't be able to escape in a short time. A huge bang sounded out as Han Li's blue light barrier was shattered and another layer of sand immediately wrapped around his body. In that moment, the woman felt at ease and floated down as she stood on top of her huge cauldron. But after descending only 30 meters, a massive change occurred. Countless beams of light suddenly penetrated from within the hardy cocoon from every direction. Before the Saintess could give another command, the sand cocoon collapsed back into a cloud and floated motionlessly in the air. At the center of the sand cloud was a large dazzling blue light. Han Li was inside of it, holding a small cauldron in his hand as he stared at the Saintess. The Saintess came to a sudden stop and looked at Han Li with an unsightly expression, disbelief flooding her mind. A cold snort could be heard from Han Li as he slapped the lid of the Heaven Void Cauldron. Ripples upon ripples of blue light clearly resonated from the cauldron and soon spread around him, causing the surrounding sand to vanish as soon as the ripples of light passed by them, appearing almost as if the light had consumed it. The Saintess was wildly alarmed by the scene and hastily formed a hand incantation, ordering the sand to resume its attack. However, the sand quietly remained in place as if having completely lost connection to the Saintess' spiritual sense. Suddenly, the Saintess betrayed panic from her face and stamped down on the huge cauldron. It continued to revolve for a time before spouting out a blinding azure light to envelope Hanli. 1 Bugua, also known as the 8 trigrams. It is most often represented as a yin-yang symbol with 8 different trigrams surrounding it in an octagon. And as his name would suggest, 1. He was somewhat skilled with spears, but this was secondary to his vast experience as a guard. He has been a guard for over 20 years, turning from a hot-headed youth to an experienced and profound Jianghu practitioner. At the moment he was steadily standing at the bow of the ship with a hand resting on the boat railing. He was examining the nearby waters with a calm expression. On this journey he was but a common bodyguard. The only thing exceptional about this job was that the ship's owner was rumored to be the trusted confidant of a very important government official. That being said, most bandits would be unwilling to take action against a ship, even if it were lightly guarded. And this was shown across their long journey, where not even a single event had occurred. Just as he was lost in his thoughts, he recalled how generous the ship's owner had paid him. The silver could afford his wife several good fabrics to make several sets of good clothing. With that thought, Wang Tietjiang couldn't help but smile as he thought about his 7-year-old son. But then a woman's voice suddenly cried out, "Quick, come! There's a huge block of ice there. It seems to have someone inside." 1. The Chang in his name means spear. When Wang Tietjiang heard this, he was stunned for a moment. The voice sounded very much like the maid named Huang Ying. However, it was quite odd for there to be ice floating in the river during flood season, not to mention the day's warm weather. He couldn't help but take a look above up at the sky and make sure that the sun was blazing in the middle of the sky. He felt on the verge of sweating even as he wore his thin clothes. Could it be there was someone on the ice? Despite the many years spent in the world of Jianghu, this was the first time he had heard of such a thing. He then reached behind him to grab the 2 short iron short spears he kept on his back before walking over to the source of the commotion with silent steps. When he arrived at the side of the boat, he saw 7 men and women gathered there, consisting of maids, servants, and boatmen. They were all talking and pointing at something in the river. He glanced over and saw something about 15 meters away. There was a sparkling white object floating on the surface of the river. He focused his gaze on it and found that it was a sparkling crystal block of ice containing someone inside. Wang Tietjiang wore an expression of surprise and couldn't help but mutter, "How strange. Could it be that someone had fallen in the river and is now trapped in a block of ice?" He heard footsteps from behind him and a hoarse voice asked, "Brother Wang, what's the matter? Brother Gao, you've come." Without turning his head, Wang Tietjiang already knew that the owner of the voice was his partner of many years, Gao Dafeng. He cultivated a body-hardening technique for many years and was somewhat famous for his boxing techniques. The large man with a full beard casually walked to Wang Tietjiang's side and clicked his tongue in wonder. "Oh, there really is someone in the ice. How rare." Wang Tietjiang coldly laughed and said, "It is only a single dead person. No matter how odd the circumstances, there isn't much to say about it." Gao Dafeng stroked his beard and chuckled. "Definitely. At the very least, the corpse hasn't come to rob us." A middle-aged man in Confucian robes walked towards them with a sullen expression and scolded the servants. "What are you making an uproar about? Didn't you know the mistress had just gone to sleep?" This person was Master Zhou, the person who was reportedly the trusted confidant of an important government official. He was currently employing Wang Tietjiang and his partner to guard the said official's family. "Master, in the river." The young maid named Huang Ying shyly extended her finger and pointed in the river. When Master Zhou saw Wang Tietjiang and Gao Dafeng, he felt somewhat baffled. Then when the young maid said something, he unconsciously glanced where she was pointing to find a block of ice with a person inside of it. He wore an odd expression on his face before he frowned and said, "It is only a dead person. There is no point in looking at it any further. Go back to your duties. Could it be that you want me to call over Steward Wang?" The man's final words were spoken with a harsh tone. When the servants heard the name Steward Wang, their expressions immediately changed and they immediately scattered. The 3 boatmen also made a discreet departure. Wang Tietjiang and Gao Dafeng exchanged a glance and were about to leave as well, feeling that it would be unwise to remain there any longer. But after Gao Dafeng took a few steps, he glanced at the river and shouted out in alarm, "How is this possible? That person is still alive." Wang Tietjiang and Master Zhou were both alarmed when they heard this, and they looked at the block of ice to find that it remained completely still. Master Zhou glared at the large man, but Gao Dafeng stood firm and said, "I am not mistaken. I saw the person in the water move his eyes. Brother Gao wouldn't fool us. Seems he is still alive." Wang Tietjiang spoke with complete trust in his partner. Master Zhou still felt a bit of doubt after he heard this, but after some thought he shook his head and said, "It doesn't concern us if that person is alive or dead. There is no need to attract any trouble to the mistress and her daughter. And since other boats haven't done anything with the ice, there is no need for us to meddle with it either." When Wang Tietjiang heard this, he didn't feel any anger or injustice over the matter. It was odd for there to be someone inside the ice, but that didn't give him any intention of allowing him on the boat. After all, as one who had tread in Jianghu for many years, he found these odd situations to be more difficult to guard against than ordinary people. However, a trace of hesitation had appeared on Gao Dafeng's face. "Master Zhou, please wait." A sweet voice suddenly sounded from across the boat. "The act of saving a life is greater than any mountain. And my mother has a merciful heart as well. Since this person is still alive, can we save him?" Then a young woman in embroidered robes soon approached them, followed by the maid Huang Ying, who was walking with a dropped head. It appears that she was the one who told the young lady about the matter. When Master Zhou saw this woman, he respectfully saluted her and hesitantly said, "Young miss, this isn't very wise. Having a stranger on the boat. What's unwise about it? Since he has survived catastrophe and encountered us, it will be considered a display of our clan's virtue to save him. We even had an empty room on the boat. Could it be with so many of us that we have something to fear from a dying man?" The young woman spoke with a soft voice, but her expression clearly displayed that she wouldn't change her mind. After a moment of thought, he could only agree with a salute. "Very well. Since the young miss had given the command, I will send out men to rescue this person." The young woman responded with a smile and then walked back with her maid in tow. Master Zhou tightly frowned as he glanced in the direction of the ship's hold, and then he wryly smiled, saying, "You heard her. Since this person must be saved and is trapped in a huge chunk of ice, I fear I will have to trouble you two to go make the trip. It's no problem. We have little else to do and have the strength to break this person out," Gao Dafeng said with a casual tone. Wang Tietjiang then examined the huge block of ice and slowly nodded, raising no objections. After spending an unknown amount of time in the darkness, Han Li woke up to a splitting headache. Before he even opened his eyes, he heard a young woman's voice sounding out, "Old scholar, when will this person awaken? It's already been 2 days. Has nothing truly happened to him? The young miss is waiting for my reply." A snort sounded out and an old man's voice sullenly said, "What does a servant like you know? I only have a cursory understanding of the medicinal arts. How can I know when he will awaken? I've always wanted to personally investigate a divine spirit treasure. Forget the excuses. When you are able to take out the cauldron again, hand it over to me for examination." One Jianghu is the world of mortal martial artists operating beyond the reach of the government. There were only a few members of his clan. His original wife, 2 concubines and 3 children. The second young miss was born from the original wife and was said to have a weak and sickly body when she was young. She was fostered by another woman during her childhood and had only recently returned to the clan. The other 2 children were born from the concubines. The eldest daughter was already married away to a suitable clan. As for the son, he was the youngest of the children at 12 years old. The other noteworthy individuals included Scholar He, Master Zhou, and an icy-eyed steward Wang who was in charge of the other servants. There were also 2 guards on board, Wang Tietjiang and Gao Dashan. When Han Li paid close attention to these individuals, Han Li felt a strong circulation of true qi from the body of steward Wang, far deeper than the superficial martial arts of the 2 guards. Although Han Li found this somewhat odd, he withdrew his spiritual sense once he figured out the circumstances on the boat and focused his attention on cultivation. 2 days later, the second young miss sent a young maid to invite Han Li over. Of course, Han Li didn't refuse and he was led to one of the larger rooms on the boat. When the second young miss saw Han Li, she sent away the others in the room and smiled at him. "Brother Han must also be someone from a Taoist sect. My name is Chao Mingrong, a disciple of the profound Jade sect. Might I know which sect Brother Han is from?" The girl spoke with a polite tone. It seemed she concluded that Han Li originated from a Taoist sect since she wasn't able to detect any devilish qi, Buddhist light, or the strict qi of Confucian sections. The profound Jade sect? Han Li frowned. He hadn't heard of this name before, but it didn't come as a surprise. There were innumerable smaller sects in the Great Jin. When Chao Mingrong saw that Han Li was hesitant, she smiled and said, "My sect is merely a small obscure sect in the Liao province. It is natural for you to not know of it. Fellow Taoist Chao is quite modest. I am but an unaffiliated cultivator. I've only recently entered the cultivation world of the Great Jin and I am not familiar with the sects here. I'm afraid I've made a fool of myself." Han Li cupped his fist and assumed an embarrassed appearance. So it turned out Brother Han had recently come back to society. Chao Mingrong sweetly smiled with bright eyes and said, "I've also only left my apprenticeship recently, but my sect is truly a small one. However, Brother Han is so young and possesses a particularly profound cultivation. This is truly worthy of congratulations." "It's nothing much," Han Li casually replied. "I've only managed to reach this stage through luck." When she saw that Han Li didn't go into detail, she wore an understanding smile and dropped the matter. She instead changed the subject, asking, "Why was Brother Han floating in the river inside a block of ice? Could it be that you were attacked?" "That is mostly the case. And I must thank you for saving me." In the Liao province's Wuyuan prefecture, there was a small town in the west known as Sinan. Nearby, there were two slender women dressed in azure Taoist robes that were heading towards a small remote mountain. As their feet shined with white light, they stood on their toes before effortlessly floating a foot off the ground. Then their gowns lengthened and they gracefully flew through the air at a low altitude. The younger woman of the two appeared to be 18 years old and gloomily spoke to the somewhat older woman at her side. "Senior Marshal Sister Lu, will Master truly not assist us? Even if we were to add on Junior Marshal Sister Chao, I fear we won't be able to deal with the sharp spirit sect's Wu Xiaoyu. He is at the 8th layer of qi condensation, and it is said that the sharp spirit sect master holds him in high esteem. We are only a pair of 6th and 7th layer cultivators. With our combined strength, we won't stand a chance even if we had help. And if we lose, Junior Marshal Sister Chao will have no choice but to allow Wu Xiaoyu to rescue that heavy criminal, which I fear will bring disaster to her father." "There is nothing we can do about it," the older of the two martial sisters sighed. "Cultivator sects have always left matters of the mortal government alone. And Junior Marshal Sister Chao is only an in-name disciple of our profound Jade sect and was only imparted a few shallow magic techniques by the master. That's why nothing had been said to her. After all, the government holds a few low-grade loose cultivators in order to have them deal with a few matters of the cultivation world. However, Wu Xiaoyu has a deep relationship with the person he wishes to save and knows that Junior Marshal Sister Chao has a relationship with our sect. When he personally came to knock on our door, we couldn't continue to turn a blind eye to this affair. Nevertheless, Master had used her status as an in-name disciple to avoid having to punish her, instead sending off that person to handle it instead. After he left, Master immediately called us over to inform us that this person most likely will be challenging Junior Marshal Sister Chao in order to force her to retreat. Master knows that our relationship with her is quite deep and sent us to warn her. It's clear that she wants us to lend her some strength. Otherwise, she would have simply used a spirit bird to deliver the message instead of us. Although Senior Marshal Sister Yu has a deep cultivation, she doesn't have a strong relationship with Junior Marshal Sister Chao and will not risk offending the Sharp Spirit sect over the matter. And Master has her hands tied since the Sharp Spirit sect has friendly relations with our own sect. As a member of the senior generation, she finds it awkward to interfere." The younger of the two couldn't help but say, "I recall that when Junior Marshal Sister Chao's father, Country Officer Chao, was stationed near our temple, he appeared quite strong and was very respectful towards the master. If he is truly implicated because of this matter, it would be a disaster. If that is true, there is nothing that can be done over it. But even if he were to lose a criminal, he would only lose his position as a country officer at most. He won't die. But since Junior Marshal Sister Chao appeared so calm, could it be that she already has a plan?" The younger woman smiled and said, "There is no need for Senior Marshal Sister to trouble herself over the matter. Everything will be clear once we get to the mountain top." Junior Marshal Sister is right. The older woman nodded. The two quickly hurried on their way, and after the time it took to finish a meal, They arrived at the mountaintop and yelped with surprise when saw an unexpected straw cottage 300 meters away. In front of the straw cottage, there was a simple stone pavilion with a young man and a girl sitting at a stone table and chatting. The younger senior martial sister revealed an expression of apprehension when she heard this. Chao Mingrong's expression wavered and she found herself at a loss of what to say. Han Li then took another glance at the middle-aged man and mysteriously smiled, saying, "Then let us quickly start. When we are done, I have some urgent business to attend to." When the middle-aged man heard him, he coldly smiled and put away the wood-board magic tool in his hand before taking out a small yellow pitchfork from his storage pouch. When the three girls saw that Han Li and the middle-aged man named Ma Yulin were about to fight, they all unconsciously took a step back and held their breaths. In their point of view, a battle between two high-layer qi condensation cultivators was something rarely ever seen. But to Han Li, dealing with a qi condensation cultivator was hardly worth any interest. He simply stood in place with his hands behind his back as he waited for his opponent to attack. Ma Yulin grew furious upon seeing Han Li's careless attitude and raised the small pitchfork in his hand, muttering an incantation and forming a hand gesture with his free hand. Then after a moment the small pitchfork trembled several times before releasing a flash of light as it shot towards Han Li in a yellow streak. Han Li's expression remained calm and showed no intention of using a magic tool. Instead he raised his hand and released a dozen talismans, each of them combusting into a fist-sized fireball as they charged towards the yellow streak. When Ma Yulin saw this, he inwardly sneered. The yellow wind fork was a mid-grade magic tool that his master had personally given him. A few fireballs weren't going to be able to block it. Despite these thoughts, he wasn't willing to meet the attack head-on and potentially damage his magic tool. He promptly formed an incantation gesture and had the yellow streak made a sudden turn and avoid the fireballs in an arc before streaking back to attack Han Li. Han Li smiled and pointed at the fireballs. Suddenly, the fireballs came to a stop and condensed together to form a cloud of flame the size of a wheel. It promptly turned into a 3-meter-long fire snake and shot towards the flying pitchfork, coiling around it and completely restraining it. Ma Yulin was greatly shocked and hastily poured the entirety of his magic power into the magic tool in an attempt to break it free, but as a result, the pitchfork simply glowed with brilliant yellow light and became further tangled with the fire snake. As the struggle continued, the magic tool suddenly dimmed and released a series of hums, a clear omen of its destruction. The middle-aged man saw that things were turning for the worse. Unwilling to have his magic tool destroyed, he quickly shouted out, "Stop! Fellow Taoist's magic power is outstanding. I concede defeat." When Han Li heard this, he smiled and pointed at the fire snake, having it relax its grip before disappearing into embers of flame. Han Li's effortless battle against an opponent of seemingly higher cultivation came as a delightful surprise to the three women in the pavilion. Wuxia wore an unsightly expression when he saw this and hesitantly muttered, "Senior martial brother Ma, this." "Enough, junior martial brother Wu." Ma Yulin quickly interrupted, "You've clearly seen that I am no match against him even with my yellow wind fork. The life of your nephew has been decided." He retrieved his magic tool and felt relieved after finding that it wasn't damaged. However, he now had a newfound fear towards Han Li's abilities and was unwilling to meddle with him any further. Wu Xiaoyu was brimming with resentment upon hearing this, but if his 10th-layer qi condensation senior martial brother didn't prove to be Han Li's match, then he wouldn't either. Afterwards, there was nothing to say and the two sharp spirit sect disciples flew off the mountain with anger in their hearts. As for the other three women, they had gathered around Han Li and were asking him about the magic techniques that he used. He gave them a practiced excuse, explaining a bit about the small tricks he used to control the low-grade magic techniques. Then the two senior martial sisters sincerely requested Han Li to answer a few questions about their cultivation problems, to which he casually agreed. As time slowly passed by and the day turned to night, the three found it awkward to stay and reluctantly departed. There were even a few cultivators that were pacing back and forth around the buildings or were chatting with their companions. Apart from the few qi condensation cultivators from the three clans, there were only cultivators at foundation establishment stage and above. With a sweep of his spiritual sense, he found that there were over a dozen core formation cultivators present. Even without the nascent soul cultivator, the cultivators present were beyond in number of what large clans in the heavenly south could produce. And this was only a trade fair that a few of the local noble clans in the Great Jin were hosting. When Han Li thought this, he couldn't help but sigh. As he was informed by the disciples that had welcomed him, he knew that morning was the time for free trade and the afternoon was when the auction would start. If he had rare materials, magic tools or other items, he would be welcome to exchange them before the auction. Additionally, the trade fair was planned to only span 3 days, and on the last day, the 1,000-year-old monarch ginseng would be auctioned. It was likely that the core formation cultivators had come solely for this item. After glancing around for a while, he began to stroll around the plaza. Han Li was currently a foundation establishment cultivator that had joined the trade fair on its second day. Although his face was unfamiliar, no one took notice of him. He was just another ordinary cultivator in the crowd. The items around the vendor booths were all common as expected and were of little interest to Han Li. There were items that would prove to be attractive to foundation establishment and core formation cultivators, but he already had countless precious materials in his possession. The only vendor booths to catch his attention were selling particularly odd magic tools and materials. But after some careful observation, he easily recognized them. Past that point, there was no further value in investigating them. After spending quite some time roaming around, he didn't end up purchasing anything, and just as he thought to enter the tent at the middle of the plaza and see what was being sold there, his expression suddenly changed and he vigilantly turned around. He saw an old man with pointed ears and thin cheeks looking at him with amazement. He possessed cultivation at early foundation establishment stage. With an icy glint in his eye, Han Li coldly said, "Fellow Taoist, you've been following me for quite a while. Could it be that you recognize me?" "Please don't misunderstand, fellow Taoist." The old man wore an embarrassed smile and calmly explained, "My name is Jin Yuan and I don't mean any harm to you. I was simply curious. This is the first time we've met, but you seem to have a great understanding of many of these tools and materials. I hold you in quite some admiration." "Oh, I didn't know fellow Taoist was so observant," Han Li calmly said, "but since you've been following me for so long, surely you have more business with me than just to chat." "Hee hee. It seems you're quite sharp. In truth, I actually have something to request of you." "Please go ahead and state it." Han Li crossed his arms and wore an indifferent expression. The old man examined the storage pouches at Han Li's waist and chuckled with narrowed eyes, saying, "I have a strange treasure here and I've been unable to make any sense of its uses and origins. I was hoping fellow Taoist could appraise it. Of course, if fellow Taoist is able to read through it, I may as well sell it to you. With your background, you will certainly be able to purchase it." "A strange treasure?" Han Li's brows stirred and his gaze wandered around the old man for a while. He eventually nodded and pointed to a room at the side. "Fine. Since fellow Taoist has been following me for a while, it seems you hold good intentions. I may as well take a look. Let's go to that hidden room and have a chat." But the great 4 clans of this prefecture came from different origins with the exception of the Kong clan. Han Li curled his lips and casually asked, "The 4 great noble clans? Didn't the Guaning prefecture have 3 great noble clans?" "Hee hee. It turned into 3 noble clans only recently. 10 years ago there were still 4. However, the Feng clan had committed an unknown offense against the other 3 clans and as a result, they overthrew them in a single night, exterminating all of the direct disciples. At the time, I heard the Feng clan was discussing something of great importance and had gathered together all of their direct disciples." Jin Yuan then continued with the rest of the story. Han Li sat down and calmly listened to what had happened to the Feng clan. When he compared it to what Feng Yu had told him, there were a few parts that were rather strange. Following that, Jin Yuan began to introduce the various clans in the Guaning prefecture. He was clearly well-traveled and knew about the many prefectures in the province with great detail. Han Li was satisfied by what he heard and now had some understanding of the cultivation world of the Liao province. This was far more detailed than what Chao Mingrong was able to tell him. Jin Yu spoke in a flurry without stopping, only occasionally pausing to state his own take on the matter. About half an hour later he eventually said all that he wanted and Han Li smiled, saying, "Thank you for the trouble of telling me all of this, but now let's move on to the topic of your strange treasure. Could you take it out and allow me to broaden my experiences?" "The treasure? Of course. I still wish for fellow Taoists to help me inspect it." Jin Yuan replied with a satisfied tone. Then under Han Li's gaze he took out a jade box from his storage pouch and placed it on the table. Han Li swept his gaze past the box and wrapped his spiritual sense around it. Then he felt his heart stop. The item in the box released a strange power that repulsed his spiritual sense, in turn greatly captured his interest. Jin Yuan carefully opened the box and revealed a fist-sized ball of dazzling golden light with hazy surface. He pushed the box towards Han Li and eagerly said, "Fellow Taoist, please take a careful look and see if you can recognize it." Han Li raised his brow and brought the box to his eyes before taking a careful look. It appeared like a bubble with a transparent center and a surface that sparkled with golden light. However, it didn't possess the slightest spiritual qi, as though it were an ordinary object. After examining it for a long while, he extended his finger and wrapped it in a layer of azure light. Then he poked the object with it, finding it to be soft and flexible as though it were truly a bubble. Han Li revealed an expression of shock, and after a moment of thought he attempted to wrap his spiritual sense around it, but it was repelled to the side as the bubble flickered with light. He then unconsciously responded by increasing the intensity of his spiritual sense, attempting to force threads of spiritual sense into it. Suddenly, a strange scene occurred. Golden light repeatedly flickered on the surface of the bubble and it began to expand one moment and contract in another, resembling the beating of a vigorous heart. Han Li tightly frowned for a long while before sending a voice transmission to Monarch Soul Divergence. "Senior, have you seen this before? Do you truly believe that there is nothing that I haven't experienced and nothing I don't know?" Monarch Soul Divergence bluntly asked. "No, I don't know what it is, but since it is able to block your spiritual sense, it could be considered a rare treasure. Ask him in detail where he acquired this item. Then you can decide whether or not you'll take it." Han Li inwardly chuckled when he heard this. Then with a flicker of his eyes, he withdrew his spiritual sense from the bubble and put the box back on the table. "How was it? Did fellow Taoist recognize it?" Jin Yuan quickly asked. "Apologies, my experience is still too lacking. I couldn't recognize it," Han Li said with a sorrowful expression. "Even fellow Taoist wasn't able to recognize it," Jin Yuan dejectedly said. "But from the way the item reacted, I had believed fellow Taoist found out how to use it." Han Li smiled and casually said, "That strange reaction was something that I was only able to produce when wrapping a large amount of spiritual sense around it. Although I don't know what it is, it does qualify as a rare treasure." "Oh, so it was like that." Jin Yuan appeared skeptical and then his gaze focused on the golden bubble on the table before he released his spiritual sense. Han Li calmly observed Jin Yuan's actions, and after a moment, golden light began to flash from the bubble and faintly pulse. The old man then let out a long sigh and wore a tired expression as he withdrew his spiritual sense. "It seems I've made a fool of myself. Fellow Taoist's spiritual sense is far stronger than mine." He spoke with a tone of admiration. He originally believed that Han Li possessed cultivation on par with his own. However, his greatest efforts were barely enough to stir the bubble at all, while Han Li's minor efforts were able to induce a powerful reaction. This solidified his assumptions that Han Li was a heavily nurtured sect disciple that possessed countless prospects. Han Li simply smiled and didn't refuse his claims. "Brother Jin, where did you acquire this item? From its peculiar nature, does it come from a particular origins?" Of course, if Brother Jin finds it difficult to say, you don't have to answer," Han Li said with an indifferent tone. Jin Yuan initially appeared hesitant before wearing a bitter smile and saying, "It is no secret where this item came from, but I fear you wouldn't believe me if I told you. The matter is rather incredulous. If you don't say it, how am I supposed to believe it? If you tell me where it came from, I might be able to recognize this item. Perhaps I'll be reminded of similar items of this nature," Han Li said with a grin. From Jin Yuan's tone, it seemed he had quite the story. Jin Yuan sighed and said, "It isn't anything worth hiding. But in order to acquire this item, many of my good friends had died and I didn't want to have the memory fresh in mind." Han Li was stunned when he heard this, but when he saw that Jin Yuan wore a pensive expression, he knew that Jin Yuan was thinking about what to say. "Fellow Taoist might have guessed, but I am a loose cultivator, one who cultivates an earth attribute cultivation art. My other abilities may be unremarkable, but it just so happened I was given an earth spirit constitution and am obviously talented in earth movement techniques. If it weren't for my poor spiritual roots, many large sects would have competed to take me in as a disciple." Once that was said, he wore a regretful expression before continuing. When my cultivation reached a certain point, I became fond of looking for ancient cultivator ruins or other curiosities in the wilderness in hopes of finding some good fortune. However, ancient cultivator residences and items weren't so easy to find. Although it could be said I made some gains, my efforts also took up a great amount of time. That is, until 3 years ago. Jin Yuan suddenly paused for a moment before his tone turned sullen. 3 years ago, I was given an invitation by a good friend of mine, saying that he discovered the huge tomb of an ancient cultivator. He planned on drawing the support of my earth movement techniques to probe into it and see if there was any treasure that could be acquired. Naturally, he would give me a portion of the treasures. I was elated to hear this and promptly agreed. As a result, we went together with a few of our other close friends. By then, I realized that the ancient tomb was greatly unordinary. It was only after we entered that we discovered. At that moment, his voice began to tremble. We discovered that the tomb actually belonged to an illustrious mortal monarch during ancient times. He was widely known as the Glorious Blaze Monarch while he was alive and was said to be a legendary character. When we saw this, we were greatly disappointed, fearing that our trip was in vain. After all, no matter how grand a mortal may be, their treasures are of little value to cultivators like us. But who could have known that we would have discovered many magic tools and precious cultivator materials buried with the king in his grave room? We were overjoyed by our newfound gains, but the decayed husks in the room suddenly began to come to life and became invulnerable soldiers. No matter the magic tools or techniques we used to attack them, they were of no use. Most of my companions were unable to protect themselves and were torn apart by the undead soldiers. And then, a strange sound came from the monarch's coffin as if the glorious Blaze Monarch himself was about to come to life. Fortunately, I was able to flee with my earth movement techniques when things turned for the worst, or else I would have perished there. The others didn't have such luck. Jin Yuan's complexion turned pale when he was done talking as he recalled the frightening scene. Feeling somewhat moved by the story, Han Li pointed to the box and said, "Then that item is." It was one of the offerings on top of the monarch's coffin. I took it just as I left. I originally thought since the item was peculiar, it would be a great treasure. But when I brought it to various market cities, none were able to identify it. Although they all knew it was an unordinary item, none were willing to purchase it at a high enough price, so it had remained in my possession ever since. Jin Yuan answered bluntly and wore a clear gloomy expression. With an odd look on his face, Han Li said, "Since it was an item buried with an ancient monarch, it isn't strange that no one can recognize it. After all, there are countless items during ancient times that are now lost to the cultivation world. However, there are questions to be had if a mortal monarch possessed cultivator items and turned into a walking corpse. Didn't you have anyone else to explore the tomb?" "Of course I did. I even brought a large group of high-grade cultivators with me. But who could have known that the ancient tomb would miraculously disappear when I arrived, only to be replaced by wilderness? Even more unbelievable was that the secret mark I placed at the entrance of the tomb was still clearly present." With that said, Jin Yuan's expression became particularly sullen. Han Li frowned. If this was all true, then Jin Yuan was the sole survivor of the group and he wasn't able to later find the place. Needless to say, his life afterwards can't have been good. After a moment of thought, Han Li calmly said, "Fellow Taoist, could you tell me where the ancient tomb was?" Jin Yuan gritted his teeth and said, "If it was still there, it'd be deep into the Snowmound mountain range." A glint flickered from Han Li's eyes and he slowly asked, "The Snowmound mountain range? If I remember correctly, you stated that cultivators often disappeared in the mountain range. Could this have anything to do with it?" After some hesitation, Jin Yuan answered, "It's possible. If fellow Taoist is interested, I can give you the location of the tomb. Perhaps you can discover something there." Afterwards, he took out a jade slip and imprinted something onto it before handing it over to Han Li. After a moment of silence, Han Li took the jade slip and calmly said, "Good. If I have the time, I'll be sure to take a look." Jin Yuan chuckled with a beaming smile and said, "It seems we've become quick friends and it has been a long time since I've been able to talk about my bitter experiences with someone else. How about this? Since you seem so interested in it, how about I sell it to fellow Taoist? It will only cost you 100 spirit stones. How about it?" 100 spirit stones? That is quite cheap, but I can't have Brother Jean suffer a loss. How about I give you 200 spirit stones instead? Han Li said, wearing an embarrassed smile. Afterwards, he touched the storage pouch at his waist and handed 2 mid-grade spirit stones over to the old man. When Jin Yuan saw the spirit stones, he couldn't help but smile. Then, after uttering a polite word of thanks, he took the spirit stones and handed over the jade box containing the golden bubble. Han Li received it and promptly placed it into his storage pouch, completing the transaction, much to Jin Yuan's satisfaction, as if in fear that Han Li would change his mind. But at that moment, a spirit beast pouch at Han Li's waist began to stir and release a strange cry. This is... Jin Yuan looked at Han Li's spirit beast pouch in shock. Han Li took a glance at his spirit beast pouch and calmly said, "It's only a few low-grade spirit beasts that I nurtured. They must have thought the box was a treat and were excited." Jin Yuan was doubtful when he heard Han Li's explanation, but he didn't pursue the matter. Instead, he chatted a bit more with him before taking his leave. After Jin Yuan walked out of the room, Han Li's smile slowly faded away to reveal a gloomy expression. Shortly after, he took the jade box out and silently looked at it. Monarch Soul Divergence calmly asked, "What? Do you plan on truly taking a look at that ancient tomb?" "Of course not," Han Li sneered. "Although I don't know if his words were true, I'm not about to brave this danger like some novice. However, I am quite curious about this monarch's tomb. After I restore my cultivation, I might delve to take a look. However, it is clear that he didn't tell me this out of the kindness of his heart. Saying that we've become quick friends, does he believe me to be a child? How could an old man like him easily tell others of this secret matter, let alone a stranger he just met? Given how eager he was, it is certain to be a trap." "That's right. But if it were those young fellows that have just left the sect, they will certainly be tricked by such people with ease. He believed that he managed to gain your trust and would have likely betrayed you in the future. Reminds of when I..." Monarch Soul Divergence then sighed and his voice came to a sudden stop. "Oh, was Senior deceived by such a trick in the past?" Han Li asked with a chuckle. Monarch Soul Divergence snorted several times out of embarrassment. "I was young once too. It isn't so strange. It's all right. This junior won't ask Senior about his past shames. However, it seems the Weeping Soul Beast is interested in this item. It does seem quite strange." Han Li's face blanked and he slapped the spirit beast pouch at his waist, releasing a streak of black light. It landed on the table and revealed itself to be a miniature foot-tall monkey covered in jet black fur. As soon as the monkey appeared, it began to sniff the air and began to stare at the golden bubble with a hesitant expression. Baffled, Han Li joined his spiritual sense with the Weeping Soul Beast. From its response, it seemed the monkey simultaneously felt somewhat fearful and excited of the golden bubble. "What's going on?" Before Han Li realized what was happening, black yin qi suddenly covered the Weeping Soul Beast's body and it charged into the golden bubble headfirst. Soon after it entered, the golden bubble brilliantly shined with light and produced a wisp of gray flame that wrapped around the beast's body. The Weeping Soul Beast wore an expression of pain and remained still as it continued to release a pitch-black qi around its body to counter the gray flame. Han Li's brow tightly frowned when he saw this. Although he didn't know what was happening, it appeared that the Weeping Soul Beast wouldn't be emerging from the bubble anytime soon and was drawing on support from the gray flame to cultivate something. But what baffled him the most was how the golden bubble was suddenly overflowing with astonishing spiritual qi fluctuations out of seemingly nowhere with the gray flame's appearance. Monarch Soul Divergence yelped in surprise and said, Wait. I've seen something like this before." "Has Senior recalled something?" Han Li asked in surprise. "Let me think," Monarch Soul Divergence replied with a solemn voice. "It was a very long time ago." When Han Li heard this, he remained silent and turned his gaze to the Weeping Soul Beast in the bubble, pondering about what was happening. A long while later, Monarch Soul Divergence finally broke his silence with a tone of astonishment. "I remember now. When I was journeying around, I saw something similar on a 10,000-year-old corpse monarch that was once a senior monk of a Buddhist sect. After he became a corpse monarch, he refined his crystal relic into an incredibly powerful protective treasure. It would render him invulnerable for a short period of time after it was released from his body. In order to conceal himself, General Gu even manipulated an alliance of clans to exterminate a clan of Buddhist origins. The Buddhist clan elders saw that something was amiss and wanted to inform a nearby Buddhist sect, but I personally exterminated their core formation cultivators. Then General Gu led the other cultivator clans to massacre the rest of their members. The man's voice sinisterly chuckled with a trace of satisfaction. With a tone of shock, the woman said, "Then your Majesty's plan is..." "Hee. This isn't anything complicated. You were bound to figure this out sooner or later. This was an idea that the Heaven-Wind Monarch of Fangjian Mountain gave me when he last visited. He had done the same and had yet to be discovered. So long as we are careful, we'll have no worry for cultivator souls in the next 300 years. Even if things go awry, we can simply move the tomb and make ourselves scarce. Apart from a few old eccentrics in the Great Gene, who could possibly stop me?" "The Heaven-Wind Monarch? He definitely isn't a simple character. Why would he tell such a secret to your Majesty? Could it be he is scheming something?" The woman's voice now held a tone of worry. "A scheme? Of course he was scheming something," the middle-aged man angrily said. "He took away 3 heart-blood pills as payment for what he told me. Even so, I still feel ill at ease over the matter. There is nothing good to be said about Fangjian Mountain's devil pair. Perhaps he wants to lure your Majesty away from the tomb. Since our 3 souls are fused together with the tomb, there are few that would be able to defeat us so long as we remain inside it," the woman said with a trace of worry. The middle-aged man's voice paused for a moment and then he solemnly said, "Beloved concubine, your words are reasonable and I'll take action to prevent this. Whenever I leave, I will fully activate the restrictions on the tomb and will be careful when I travel. Neither will I allow the devil pair to know when I leave the tomb." "It will be fine so long as you are careful, your Majesty," the woman's voice suddenly turned sweet. "In truth, there should be no reason for your Majesty to personally take action. You can simply leave the matter over to me or your incarnations. After all, so long as your Majesty is safe, I will be glad to encounter any formidable enemy." "Hee. You might not know this, but for this plan to work, I require all the noble clans of the Guaning Prefecture to be under my control," the middle-aged man patiently explained to the woman. "When I last left, I had to deal with that eccentric Kong without damaging his body. As such, I was lightly wounded and didn't continue to involve myself. And while the other 2 noble clans didn't have any nascent soul cultivators, they did come from unordinary backgrounds. They possess several rare treasures that are effective against heretics like ourselves. I reckon that the 2 clans had been established by their originating sects in an attempt to monitor me." After a long while inside the hidden fortune room, Hanli eventually decided to put the weeping soul beast inside his storage pouch while it was still inside the golden bubble. Then he walked out and shrunk the hidden fortune room back to its original size. After he went back to the main hall, he returned the room to the middle-aged woman before heading out to the plaza. At that moment, it was already afternoon and there were nearly half as many cultivators as before. They were all heading in a peculiar stone building to participate in the auction. Without another thought, he moved to join them. A white-robed cultivator standing at the entrance of the auction saw Han Li and greeted him with a salute. "Fellow Taoist, to prevent too many idle spectators, we are charging 3 spirit stones to participate in the auction." Han Li smiled and silently pressed his hand against his storage pouch before handing over 3 spirit stones to the white-robed cultivator. The cultivator smiled back and gave him a palm-sized jade plate, allowing him to enter. Han Li glanced at the jade plate as he walked through the entrance of the building and saw that it had engraved 243 in silver letters. Aside from that, there was nothing else remarkable. After walking through a 60-meter-long passageway, he came across 4 cultivators guarding a door that shined with white light. When they saw Han Li arrive, they all silently examined him with expressionless faces. Han Li ignored them and walked past them, opening the gate and entering the main hall. He then heard a loud man's voice saying, 500-year-old phoenix tail flower, 790 spirit stones. Is there anyone bidding any higher? Well, then this spirit herb goes to fellow Taoist 130. In a moment, please go to the back and pay the spirit stones for the medicine herb. Han Li clearly saw over 200 people sitting in the hall. Each of them was sitting in front of a table and had placed down their jade plate on top of it, clearly revealing the shining silver numbers on top of it. In front of the stone hall, there was a blue-robed middle-aged man with an imposing appearance. As he was speaking, he was holding open a jade box with a bright purple flower inside of it. The one who purchased this medicine herb was a fat old man. When he saw the middle-aged man verify the winning bid, he stood up with a happy expression and walked over to the side door as if he couldn't wait to acquire it. Han Li looked at the scene with indifference and walked over to a nearby empty seat. He sat down in a chair made of pure white stone. Its jade-like appearance and its warm sensation had aroused a bit of interest from Han Li. This is... Han Li pondered for a moment, recalling the stone materials in his memory only to find that he hadn't seen this material before. His lips faintly curled from his surprise. "Fellow Taoist, is this your first time seeing wormstone?" He suddenly heard a woman's voice with a faint giggle. Wormstone. He turned his head to the side and saw two young female cultivators who resembled each other so strongly they could be sisters. One of them was wearing yellow clothes and the other green clothes, but both of them were indisputably outstanding beauties. The one who spoke was the closer of the two and was wearing green. She found it silly how Han Li touched the table. "Little sister, don't speak out of turn," the yellow-clothed woman quickly said. "Fellow Taoist, please don't take offense. My younger cousin had just come out from the clan and her words are still rash. I hope you'll forgive her." Youngster cousin? They're not sisters by blood? Han Li thought with surprise. But for the two to reach foundation establishment stage at such a young age, they clearly had exceptional aptitudes. With that thought he smiled and casually said, "It's all right. I've only heard of wormstone before, but this is the first time I've seen it. Does fellow Taoist know about this item in detail? It can't be a common material or else I would have heard of it before, despite having cultivated in the wilderness all this time. Wormstone is completely different from the material known as worm jade," the yellow-clothed woman explained with a smile. "It isn't strange for fellow Taoists to not know of it as it is a material rarely found in other places. It is only present here because it is a specialty of the Snowmound Mountains. But apart from being warm to the touch and exceptionally white, there is nothing else notable about it. But of course, it is far more valuable than the common jade found in the mortal world." So it was like that. "Many thanks for your explanation." Han Li nodded with understanding and then his expression blanked as he turned to look at the middle-aged man auctioning a top-grade magic tool. His actions had caused the green-clothed woman to narrow her eyes and curl her lips, betraying a trace of disdain. Just as she was about to say something else, her older cousin shot her a stern glance, causing her to keep her mouth shut. Han Li completely ignored this and was calmly looking up at the magic tools and spirit herbs being auctioned. Although the auction was certain to be somewhat lacking considering that it was hosted by local clans, he paid particular attention to it as there was a vast difference in prices between the Great Jin and the Heavenly South. It would serve as preparation for when he would search for rare materials. After some calm observation he came to the conclusion that regardless of whether they were spiritual herbs or magic tools, they were significantly more expensive than they were in the Heavenly South. The rarer items were particularly costly. After some thought he came to realize that although the Great Jin was over 10 times larger than the Heavenly South, they attracted a far greater number of cultivators considering their complete legacies of cultivation. This caused a severe lack of magic tools and medicines in comparison to the Heavenly South. Conversely, it could also be said that the Great Jin was abundant with resources and would have many rare materials that would never be seen in the Heavenly South and even the scattered star seas. In this auction alone, there were a few medicines and tool materials that he didn't know of. This was much to Han Li's joy. It appeared that if he paid a visit to the many high-grade market cities in the Great Jin, there was the possibility of acquiring the few rare materials he needed. Just as Han Li thought this, the blue-robed middle-aged man on the stage called out to bring out the next item, a tray with 3 deep red gems on it. They shined with a flicking light similar to a blazing flame. It was rather eye-catching. 3 fire's melt crystals, the middle-aged man announced with a smile, an ideal material for refining top-grade fire tribute magic tools. Fellow Taoists, the bid will now start at 500 spirit stones. Han Li took a casual glance at them and was about to turn his eyes away, but the crystals then caught his eye and he let out a yelp. Monarch Soul Divergence's voice lazily sounded out from the back of his mind. "Youngster Han, from your reaction, it seems those gems have caught your eye." "Gems? It seems there are times that even senior can be mistaken." Han Li sent out the voice transmission with a chuckle and announced a bid for 600 spirit stones. "What? There isn't anything particular about these gems. Although my cultivation is gone, my spiritual sense remains. I don't believe I'm mistaken. Monarch Soul Divergence said with a doubtful tone. With a strange voice, Hanli replied, my experience may still be lacking, but I would dare to say there are few in this world that have more experience in demon beast cores than me. This has something to do with demon cores? Monarch Soul Divergence was stunned from hearing the confidence in Hanli's voice. Were it not for the many years he spent with Hanli, he would have believed Hanli to be confused. After a moment of silence, Monarch Soul Divergence continued, since you're certain, there must be some reasoning behind it, but I cannot bring myself to believe that there is something strange about those fire's melt crystals before I have the evidence. Needless to say, I'm not the only one who didn't see anything strange about the gems. Even the auction appraisers couldn't find anything exceptional about them, and they are vastly experienced in dealing with rare items. After hearing Monarch Soul Divergence's words of doubt, Hanli smiled and declared a higher bid, forcing the competing bidders to back down. Happy that the gems were sold for a high price, the middle-aged man glanced at the number on Hanli's jade plate and loudly shouted, 800 spirit stones. The 3 fires melt crystals go to fellow Taoist 243. Please head to the back of the hall to pay for the item. When Hanli heard this, he took his jade plate and walked to the side hall. There was a white-robed chi condensation cultivator waiting for him there. When he saw Hanli arrive, he immediately led Hanli to a small waiting room in the rear hall. A short moment later, a servant girl brought him a cup of tea before departing. Hanli glanced at the cup of tea and left it alone as he calmly examined the room. Soon, a bald old foundation establishment cultivator walked in with a beaming smile. I am truly ashamed we kept you waiting for so long. Please take a look and see if this is the item you bidded on. After he said this, he handed over a jade box over to Hanli. Hanli promptly opened the jade box and found 3 crystals blazing with red light. With a calm expression, he carefully examined them in his hands and remained silent for a long while. What? Is there a problem with the fire's melt crystals? The old man asked with a friendly chuckle. There's nothing wrong. These were precisely what I bidded on. Hanli nodded and calmly replied. Then he handed over the spirit stones, took the gems and took his leave with a salute. As Hanli walked away, the old man took a glance at the empty jade box and frowned, his eyes revealing slight doubt. Soon Hanli returned to his seat at the auction and in a flash of light, a fire's melt crystal appeared in his hand. Hanli looked at the gem with a smile and obvious satisfaction. The green-clothed woman next to Hanli saw his expression and said, fellow Taoist must be quite wealthy to spend 800 spirit stones on 3 fire's melt crystals. After calmly looking at the woman, Hanli replied, that's right. I've been wanting to buy those crystals for a while. Being able to buy these made this trip quite worth it. When the green-robed woman saw the glint in Hanli's eye, her heart trembled and she suddenly became unable to say anything further. The yellow-robed woman at her side saw this and her expression changed as if she sensed something. She also said nothing. After acquiring this unexpected harvest, Hanli began to look forward to the rest of the auction. But at that moment, Monarch Soul Divergence couldn't help but ask, youngster Han, what do those fire's melt crystals have to do with demon cores? How about you give me an explanation? Senior should have already guessed it, Hanli calmly answered. One of the fire's melt crystals is actually a grade 7 demon core, but after the passage of countless years, its body had turned to that of complete crystal. It now appears no different from a fire's melt crystal. Even those with exceptionally powerful spiritual sense aren't able to see the difference. Grade 7 demon core? Since one can't tell the difference with spiritual sense or its exterior appearance, how were you able to see through it? Monarch Soul Divergence wasn't particularly shocked, but he still felt somewhat doubtful. This has something to do with the baleful chi on my body, Hanli calmly explained. In the past I had personally slain thousands upon thousands of high-grade demon beasts, resulting in the dense baleful chi on my body. As a result, the baleful chi on my body began to stir when the grade 7 demon core was taken out. Since I handled a great number of demon cores in the past, I acquired a particular method of detecting them. So it was like that, the old man chuckled. If you truly killed so many demon beasts, then it makes sense to me why you have so much baleful chi on your body. However, I am quite interested in how you were able to kill so many demon beasts. It seems you have many old tales that haven't been revealed to me. It's nothing. I simply had an opportunity in the past. More importantly, I fear Senior doesn't know the use of a crystallized demon core. Not wanting to mention his years in the scattered star seas, Han Li changed the topic to capture Monarch Soul Divergence's attention. Oh. This is also the first time I've heard of a demon core turned to crystal, Monarch Soul Divergence said with interest. I do wonder what it can be used for. The crystallized demon core can no longer be considered a true demon core, Han Li said as he stroked his chin. If it were used during pill concoction, it will turn into a poison that would kill ordinary cultivators when taken. As a matter of fact, this material is an optimal material for refining flying needles. It is said that when a flying needle is crafted from it, the needle's speed will be so fast it'll immediately strike the enemy as soon as it is released. And most fearsome of all is that a flying needle crafted from this material will be nearly invisible while in flight, allowing it to be an optimal weapon for sneak attacks. Han Li brought the large man to an unremarkable room in the building and laid him on the floor. His body was covered in blue frost and his eyes were open wide and filled with terror. Han Li summoned a silver needle in between his fingers with a wave of his hand. He then stooped down and quickly stabbed the needle several times into the large man's head. The large man trembled as a result and turned completely lax. Han Li formed a hand incantation and he softly muttered an incantation before striking the man's body with several spell seals. The frost immediately disappeared from the man's body and he sat up with blank eyes and stiffly crossed his legs, then waiting motionlessly like a puppet. With azure light covering his face, Han Li waved his sleeve, releasing several various colored spell flags around him. They surrounded the two, creating a chi-concealing spell formation. After activating the formation, his body blurred and reappeared behind the large man. He raised his hand and pressed it against the top of the large man's head. At that moment, light brightly glowed from Han Li's body and enveloped the large man. What is your name and what is your position in the Kong clan? Han Li's cold and emotionless voice echoed from the light. The large man listlessly replied, I am Kong Do. I am the chief of external affairs. Since when did the Kong clan occupy Falcon Cloud Village? Where did the original residents go? 7 years ago, the original residences were all relocated to a town by the name of Snow River. What is the purpose of the Kong clan's Grand Assembly? That is. After a string of questions, Han Li extracted most of the information he wanted. At the end, he released his grip on the large man and the man immediately fell to the ground. Han Li then took out a medicine pill and forced him to swallow it before striking all the acupoints on the man's body with a silver needle. A while later, Han Li stood up and muttered, with the worry-free needle, his recent memories should be sealed. He won't immediately stir any trouble. It is a pity I can't make use of the dream tear technique because of my lacking cultivation and save myself all this trouble. Han Li shook his hand and then withdrew the spell flags before walking out of the building. Afterwards, he directly made his way to the village's exit, having completely lost his interest in further participating in the Grand Assembly. There were quite a few cultivators that were already leaving. As a result, Han Li hadn't attracted any attention from guards at the entrance. In a streak of azure light, Han Li made his way to the small town that the large man had mentioned. The small town wasn't very far away from the Snowmound Mountains. Soon he faintly saw Snow River Town over the horizon. Snow River Town was about 4 times larger than Falcon Cloud Village, but it still barely qualified as a town. When Han Li entered, it was already late and the sky was dark, leaving scarcely few people wandering on the streets. As a result, Han Li's arrival hadn't stirred up any attention. As Han Li walked through the streets, he slowly released his spiritual sense, in case there were any nascent soul cultivators hidden nearby. As he expected, there were cultivators in the town, but a majority of them were low-grade cultivators. The highest of these cultivators was a core formation cultivator that was hidden in a courtyard in the southwest corner of the town. As Han Li stealthily swept his spiritual sense through the town, none of the cultivators detected him in the slightest. After confirming that there were no threats to him present in the town, he concealed his aura and walked down the street, occasionally sweeping his eyes to either side as if he were looking for something. Soon he arrived at a wide intersection, what seemed to be the center of the town. Han Li glanced at the sign for an inn and narrowed his eyes before coming to a stop. T with the brick in hand, Han Li took a closer look at it and swept his other hand past it. With fingertips glowing in azure light, they brushed past the brick's surface and caused it to ripple in white light. He curled his lips into a smile and nodded. The brick was consistent with what Feng Yu told him. It was actually a storage pouch in disguise, but it needed to be opened with a specific incantation. If it were opened by force, the items it contained would be turned into ash. Han Li acquired the incantation from Feng Yu before his death and now uttered it, spitting out a ball of azure light with talisman characters roaming across it. It struck the brick and enveloped it within. Soon he formed an incantation gesture with a single hand and quickly pressed against each corner of the brick with his finger. With a light bang, a pitch-black hole appeared on its surface. He didn't take the risk of sticking his hand into it. Instead, he slapped the bottom of the brick and it trembled with light, causing 2 items to fly out from the hole. There was a jade slip that was several inches large and a pile of tightly bundled documents. He easily caught them in the air with a single hand. After putting away the brick, Han Li paid no attention to the documents and immediately immersed his spiritual sense into the jade slip. Not long after, his expression warped and turned sullen. Monarch Soul Divergence saw his reaction and asked, "What is it? Could it be it doesn't contain the location of the Feng clan's secret cave?" "It's there, and it even details its exact location." After letting out a long sigh, Han Li withdrew his spiritual sense from the jade slip and frowned. "Then why are you so gloomy? Could it be the cave is in a dangerous place?" As expected of an eccentric nearing the age of 10,000 years, Monarch Soul Divergence guessed correctly. Han Li sighed and wore a helpless expression, saying, "It is possible I'll run into trouble. The secret cave is located deep into the Snowmound Mountains. Why did the Feng clan establish it there? Could it be they didn't know there was something strange about the mountains and that cultivators often disappeared?" Monarch Soul Divergence spoke with a flabbergasted tone. "Who knows?" Han Li said with a wry smile. Perhaps the Feng clan ancestor felt that the more dangerous the area, the safer it would be. Monarch Soul Divergence lazily said, "Since they had always used this secret cave, it shouldn't be too dangerous. There's no point in being too worried." "I hope so. Now that I've acquired the map, I can't let this go by because of some unknown danger. If this goes smoothly, I'll arrive there in a day." Afterwards, Han Li put away the jade slip and then picked up one of the documents, flipping through it before yelping in surprise. He then said, "These are the deeds for the Feng clan properties in the mortal world. They can be said to own the most land in the region." "Is this anything strange?" Monarch Soul Divergence asked. "The noble clans of the Great Gene and the immortal clans of the Heavenly South have quite a few differences. Interfering with the mortal world can be considered quite ordinary, and it isn't a disgrace to interact with high-ranking government officials and the wealthy. Even vagrant cultivators take the initiative to reach out to them for help. Not only does the Great Gene span across a great amount of land, but the mortals living there exist in far greater density than the Heavenly South. As a result, there are fewer desolate areas, and spirit medicines and spirit stones often found themselves in the hands of mortals. This is different in the Heavenly South, where mortals occupy far less land and there is much more wilderness. As such, the Heavenly South cultivators don't interact much with them." "How about it? Do you have any certainty of restraining Devil Glorious Blaze's incarnations? If they manage to escape, we'll end up scaring them all away." One of the 2 figures sent a voice transmission to the other, speaking with a sharp voice. The other figure snorted and gloomily said, "King Glorious Blaze's so-called incarnations are created from soul-mending techniques, forcefully refining them until they are obedient puppets. Their intelligence is greatly reduced as a result. Although they possess nascent soul cultivation, they are easily handled by cultivators of equivalent strength. It won't be difficult to take them on together. But now that the old devil is releasing his own incarnations by themselves, it will benefit us greatly. Killing them would be the same as cutting off his arms." The voice was deep and low. "Brother Heavenwind's words are very sensible," the sharp voice said. "However, I am quite curious about the person those incarnations are chasing. It was enough to make the old devil send men away from the tomb at a crucial moment and lose sight of his objective. Who knows? Regardless of who it is, they have no influence over our plans. King Glorious Blaze's cultivation will greatly decrease when he leaves his tomb. This is an extremely rare opportunity. That old devil is extremely sly and never leaves his tomb for more than a moment at a time. If it wasn't for the trap I set, I fear we wouldn't have any opportunities in the slightest. After all, his abilities are no lesser than a late nascent soul cultivator while he is in his tomb. The sharp voice sinisterly chuckled and said, "If old devil Glorious Blaze knew that we have already leaked this plan to the other two noble clans, I wonder what expression he would make. The clans have already invited their sect backers and are waiting for him to take the bait. Besides, even if he manages to escape them through a fluke, we'll be waiting outside his tomb. It will be impossible for him to escape." That's right. Us brothers schemed over 10 years for this plot. Furthermore, ever since we laid out the trap, we've always been outside, keeping an eye on his actions and allowing us to move at an opportune time. With him gone, his beloved concubine and his child won't be able to stand against us three. Then the treasures he's accumulated for countless years and the thousands of corpse soldiers inside the tomb will be ours. And I've heard that his heavenly corpse body will soon be completed. From his cautious nature, the heavenly corpse pearl for the body should be hidden somewhere in the tomb. So long as we can find it and rid it of his soul, we can also make use of the body to cultivate body hardening and strengthening techniques. It is the ideal treasure for that type of cultivation. The deep voice of Brother Heavenwind spoke with a greedy tone. The sharp voice said, "Hee hee. My cultivation technique doesn't emphasize cultivating body strengthening techniques, so I have no interest in the heavenly corpse pearl. I only want the thousands of corpse soldiers his tomb contains. With those soldiers I could become a faction of power without leaving seclusion." When Brother Heavenwind heard this he spoke with excitement, but I know what fellow Taoist Ian would say. He'd only want the corpse spirit art so that he will be able to control the corpse soldiers with ease. Otherwise he would have to go and ask us for help to use them. That sounds right. The owner of the sharp voice then examined the green silhouettes from a distance and proposed, "Now should be time to act. Since Brother Wild Sand is closely following after the old devil, there should be no problems. We should take action before something unexpected occurs. Let's quickly get rid of the old devil's incarnations and then returning to the tomb to lie in ambush. If we let the old devil make it back, things will turn for the worse. Yes, it is nearly time. The old devil should have left the Snowmound Mountains. Let's set off." Heavenwind paused for a moment before nodding in agreement. At that moment the two green incarnations were violently howling, but soon, they suddenly felt astonishing spiritual chi fluctuations from behind them. They couldn't help but to turn around to look. As a result, they saw a large black mist and an astonishing storm of wind chasing after them. It filled up the entire sky and appeared almost as if it aimed to envelop the two. Han Li was currently standing in front of a stone door behind the waterfall, completely ignorant of the great problem that another party had unintentionally resolved. Although he would have been able to easily dispatch of the two incarnations, it would consume the last opportunity for him to lift the soul lock seal. His eyes were focused on a corner of the stone door and there was a slight protrusion there with an inch-large hole on top of it. He reached for his storage pouch and took a sparkling silver key into his hand. He flicked his finger and shot it into the hole in a silver streak. The key smoothly entered, leaving the outer half outside of the hole. He smiled when he saw this and pointed his finger at the key, shooting out a streak of azure light towards it. Then the key slowly turned a half circle and the stone-white gate began to glow in a layer of white light. With a faint tremble, the stone doors slowly opened, leaving a small opening for someone to walk through. Han Li glanced at the opening before calmly heading in. After walking over 30 meters inside, there was a 3-meter-large transportation formation in front of him. There were 8 grooves around the spell formation that were completely empty. When he saw this, he let out a faint smile. If one didn't have deep knowledge of formations, they would put their spirit stones on all the grooves, resulting in the formation's spatial power to completely disintegrate them. Whoever designed this hidden storage was quite shrewd. He walked up to the spell formation and his eyes flickered several times. His sleeve trembled and 5 low-grade spirit stones shot into 5 separate grooves. Then he struck the spell formation with a spell seal and the transportation formation began to hum. With Han Li's attainments in spell formations, he could see if there was anything amiss with the formation. He was able to quickly tell that it was safe and then walked into the center of the formation. White light then wrapped around him and he disappeared from sight. The distance he was teleported was quite short. As expected, he didn't feel much of a headache from the teleportation due to his strong spiritual sense. Then in a flash of white light he appeared in a large hall. He swept his gaze across it and took the entire scene in. It only spanned about 60 meters long and was made completely out of cleanly cut warm stone. There weren't many things in the hall. 2 rows of green shelves and 3-meter-long silver chests. Where have I seen this before? You've seen this before. Monarch's Soul Divergence asked in amazement. That's right. I remember now. This technique is similar to the demon race cultivation art. Han Li then touched his storage pouch and took out a palm-sized copper plate into his hand. It was the sacred provenance plate he acquired from the scattered star seas. 1. First appeared in chapter 546. Han Li later acquired it from the venomous flood dragon. Without another word, Han Li began to compare the scripts on the plate and the jade slip. After a moment he discovered that the techniques were different, but they clearly stemmed from the same source. Of the 2 techniques, the bright jade arts was far more shallow, but the 2 gave the same indistinct feeling that something was missing, causing him to feel confused over the matter. When Monarch's Soul Divergence saw Han Li shifting his attention between the jade slip and copper plate, he felt that something was odd and couldn't help but ask, "What is that copper plate?" After a moment of hesitation, Han Li sighed and tossed the copper plate into the bamboo tube. "Senior, have a look. My aptitude is too poor, so I am unable to see how they relate. Perhaps Senior will be able to clear my confusion." Monarch's Soul Divergence began to examine the technique on the copper plate. "These are demon characters. This should be a technique that came from an exceptional demon clan. Let me look." About a quarter of an hour later, Monarch's Soul Divergence came to a clear conclusion. With a decisive tone he stated, "I have a general idea of what is similar. The Buddhist Bright Jade Arts is an altered version of the Demon Clan technique. Furthermore, it is based on the portion of the copper plate that is missing." At that moment Han Li finished his thoughts as well and said, "So it was like that. However, the last portion of the Bright Jade Arts isn't capable of being joined together with the copper plate. It should still be lacking an addition section." I didn't think that youngster Han would be able to see that too. That's right, the set of Demon Clan cultivation arts could be divided into 3 sections. The Bright Jade Arts are using the most basic body refinement portion of the Demon Clan technique. As for the copper plate, it details the incantations for the final ability and is missing the middle portion that details the bodily transformations. These techniques are quite extraordinary. How interesting. 3 heads and 6 arms, isn't that the same technique the Elder Devil used? I've heard that the Demon Clan were those most in touch with the Elder Devil realm. It seems the rumors were true. Monarch's Soul Divergence chuckled with great amusement. After hearing that, Han Li added on, "Then the technique should have been something the Elder Devils passed on to the Beast clans. Later, a Buddhist sect acquired a portion of the technique's foundations and changed it into the current Bright Jade Arts." For the devils, demons, and Buddhists to hold this technique with such importance, it seems to have come from a single great origin. Han Li then sank into thought for a long while before sighing and saying, "But regardless of the might of the technique, the pestilence demons in my body may soon fail to contain the baleful qi and I don't have much more time. I will have to cultivate the Bright Jade Arts to resolve this crisis as soon as possible." Monarch's Soul Divergence pondered for a moment and said, "Yes, it is as you say. Spending more time to find another technique will prove far too dangerous. Furthermore, the technique might prove difficult for others, but with the vast amount of baleful qi at your disposal, it should be much easier to cultivate." "I hope that is the case, but it seems it requires a Vajra relic in order to cultivate. Will there be any problems if I attempt to cultivate it?" "Didn't you just acquire a Vajra relic? This is an opportunity. I might have not suggested you to cultivate the technique otherwise. Although you would barely be able to use the Feng clan ancestors' crystal relic to cultivate it, it would be far less effective than not using a Vajra relic. Once your spirit beast finishes consuming the corpse flames in the Vajra barrier, you will be able to finish refining it. I will impart another set of techniques to you for do so, allowing you to cultivate the Bright Jade Arts without a problem. When I journeyed in the past, I became very interested in crystal relics and such. I even infiltrated one of the 10 great Buddhist sects for over 10 years. There is no need to worry too much over the matter given how much I researched into it. Even if you didn't cultivate the Bright Jade Arts, You would need a crystal relic to cultivate other Buddhist techniques for dissolving baleful qi. And given how widespread Buddhist sects are in the Great Jin, it shouldn't be too difficult to find one. Monarch Soul Divergence seemed to have already given the matter much thought. After some careful consideration, Han Li felt that there was no problem in cultivating the technique and said, "If that's the case, I can be at ease. Since the technique is suitable, I may as well hurry and leave. Ever since I entered these mountains, I felt that something was amiss. This is not a good omen. I better look for a spirit vein to cultivate with." Afterwards, he swept his gaze through the hall one last time before walking back into the transportation formation and disappearing in a flash of white light. In the time it took to finish a meal, Han Li was directly flying out from the Snowmound Mountains in a streak of azure light. As he flew, he was discussing with Monarch Soul Divergence about where he could find a spirit vein and secretly cultivate. After flying over 100 kilometers, a large world-shaking boom echoed from the air and an entire group of mountains collapsed. Han Li was caught off guard from the boom and lost balance as he felt a ring buzzing in his ear. With a vastly changed expression, he turned to look in the direction of the sound. Then he flew off in the opposite direction with greater speed. As he flew a dozen kilometers away, he felt astonishing spiritual qi fluctuations from behind him. Then a cloud of gray qi, a cloud of black qi and a white windstorm began to tear through the sky, pursuing one another as they headed in Han Li's direction. With his current cultivation, they quickly closed the distance to only 2 kilometers away. Not good. Han Li shouted in his mind as his heart suddenly dropped. He had intended to avoid the ongoing quarrel, but now trouble had come to find him. From the pressure the three parties emitted, it was clear they were all nascent soul cultivators. However, the strength of the gray qi was fluctuating as if its owner was injured. It appeared the other two parties were moving in for the kill. Unable to completely avoid them, Han Li steeled his heart and flew to the side. He wanted to see whether or not the three would fly past and ignore an insignificant foundation establishment cultivator like him. After Han Li flew for another 40 meters, he came to a sudden stop and looked all around him with a bewildered expression. The cloud of gray qi soon took the lead and brushed past him. Concealed inside the gray qi was a pale cultivator wearing a tall crown. When he coldly glanced at Han Li in passing, an odd expression appeared on his face before he continued shooting over 100 meters away. Following that, a series of world-shaking tremors erupted around him and a 3-meter-wide yellow gourd flew over from 300 meters away. The mouth of the gourd trembled and a cloud of yellow sand burst out, rushing in the direction of the fleeing gray qi. Soulfall sand. When the figure in the gray qi saw the incoming sand, he abruptly sped up with a fearful expression in an attempt to avoid it. "Hee hee. Brother Glorious Blaze, you're too slow." Accompanied by a wild howl of laughter, a large yellow-robed man with a thick beard emerged from the gourd. The large man then formed an incantation gesture before a huge bang sounded out, as the sky was suddenly covered in a deep yellow cloud of sand, inside of which formation flags could occasionally be seen. King Glorious Blaze, the cultivator within the gray qi, was alarmed by the sudden development and hastily shot downward only to be met with the sight of yellow sand. The incoming cloud of sand had already enveloped an area of over a kilometer around him. King Glorious Blaze came to a stop and gave a menacing glare at the yellow-robed man standing on top of the huge gourd. Their standoff only lasted for a moment before the white windstorm and the black devilish cloud quickly arrived beside him, leaving King Glorious Blaze completely surrounded. The large yellow-robed man calmly said, "Brother Glorious Blaze, when you fought the Grand Yang sect's Mr. Song, you were struck by the Sun-Thrust ruler and your incomplete heavenly corpse body was heavily injured. And now you find yourself surrounded. So long as you spit out your heavenly corpse pearl and let us place you under a restriction, we'll let you live. After all, you've associated with us for a while now, and I would find it somewhat cruel to just scatter your soul." King Glorious Blaze appeared exceptionally calm after hearing this and coldly said, "Master Wild Sand, I knew it was you. Ever since I left that ancient tomb, I had felt a faint sense of unease. It seems you were watching me this entire time. From how you lured me out into this trap, it appears you've been planning this for a long time. But aren't you a bit too patient though? You were watching me for 10 years while you were scheming. As such, it can't be considered a surprise that I fell prey to you. But do you really think that a trifling yellow sand formation will be enough to stop me?" After hearing this, the yellow-robed man replied, It seems my words fell on deaf ears and now we definitely can't allow you to escape. Brother Glorious Blaze, don't blame me for being ruthless. We hadn't expected that you would carry something as important as the heavenly corpse pearl on your person. Also, don't forget that in order to make sure this plan was perfect, I filled my gourd with the blue crystal heavens and that Madame Heavenstone spent over 100 years refining. Fellow Taoist truly thinks that you can escape with earth movement techniques, then you're delusional. King Glorious Blaze's expression revealed shock, but after a moment of doubt he smirked in disbelief and said, "Blue crystal heavens? As if Madame Heavenstone would allow you to borrow something as precious to her as her own life. You sure know how to bluff." Hee hee. Master Wild Sand coldly laughed when he heard this and didn't bother to refute it, causing King Glorious Blaze's heart to tremble. Despite the obvious advantage the three devils had, they now found themselves at a standstill. It seemed like they either feared what would happen if he fought with his life on the line or were planning something else. When King Glorious Blaze saw this, he rejoiced. Before he had fled, he sent a voice transmission for reinforcements and it shouldn't be long before they arrived. Silence filled the air as the four maintained their standoff. Apart from these four old eccentrics, there was a fifth person trapped in the yellow sand. That person was Han Li, who had been caught off guard and was trapped in the large sand formation alongside them. Han Li felt particularly gloomy and had remained silent this entire time, hoping he wouldn't attract any attention. He was currently waiting for an opportunity to slip away when their fight began. But before he could make his escape, a sharp voice from the cloud of black devilish chi said, "That junior over there is in the way. Before we finish our business, let's get rid of him first." The large yellow-robed man glanced at Han Li and dully said, "Right. Let's kill the pest before it can become a hindrance." When Han Li heard this, his heart was set ablaze with anger. It appeared he would have to utilize his last opportunity to lift the soul lock seal or die. Without any further hesitation, he grasped his hands in an incantation gesture and softly muttered an incantation, causing his face to quickly cycle through the images of 5 glowing green ghost faces. Then 5 egg-sized green balls of light flew out from his body and disappeared without a trace. While this was all happened, the old devil in the black cloud had already attacked. A portion of the black cloud condensed into a huge black python, which fiercely pounced towards Han Li with a gaping maw displaying its incisive fangs. When the yellow-robed man and the cultivator within the white windstorm saw this, they didn't bother to launch their own attacks against a meager Foundation establishment cultivator. But when King Glorious Blaze saw what was happening, his brow faintly stirred and a trace of surprise appeared on his face. The huge black python quickly arrived above Han Li with its mouth wide open, but then Han Li raised his hand and released a bolt of golden lightning. It struck the huge python whose body trembled before scattering into dust. Soon after, Han Li began to circulate the magic power in his body and released an astonishing aura, covering his body in sparkling azure light and abundant spiritual chi. After easily striking down the python, he looked at the old devils in front of him and calmly said, "You four can have your fight, but there is no need to involve me. I'm only passing through." The old devils around him simultaneously looked at Han Li in shock. At that moment, they realized the cultivator had coincidentally trapped in the spell formation was in existence on par with their own. He was simply concealing himself through some unknown technique. Did this person harbor any malicious intentions or was he truly only here by coincidence? The 3 devils began to ponder about the situation and remained silent as they were absorbed in their thoughts. King Glorious Blaze felt his heart tremble. Although he knew that Han Li was the cultivator who took the Vajra barrier and should be somewhat capable, he didn't expect that he would possess such an impressive cultivation. King Glorious Blaze's expression wavered upon this discovery. Han Li hastily spread his spiritual sense past the yellow sand restrictions and faintly frowned. There truly was some heavens and inside of it and would need to spend quite a bit of effort to break through it. After some thought, Han Li calmly spoke to the man standing on top of the large gourd. "Fellow Taoist, you should have heard me. I don't plan on meddling in your affairs, so you should allow me to leave." After a moment of hesitation, the yellow-robed man slowly said, "Fellow Taoist, could you tell us your surname and why you were in the Snowmound Mountains?" "My surname is Han and the mountains were merely along the way. That answer should be to your satisfaction." Han Li answered with a cold and impatient tone. There was only a limited amount of time before the soul lock seal would come back into effect, so Han Li couldn't remain stuck in this situation for long. Release the restrictions and allow you to leave? The yellow-robed man's expression turned unsightly. He blinked several times and then said, I fear that won't do. The sand formation isn't easy to release. If we were to relax the restrictions, we would be giving him an opportunity to escape. How about fellow Taoist bear with it for the time being and we release you after we exterminate this old devil? King Glorious Blaze chuckled and said, if fellow Taoist Han believes those three, then you are truly bringing about your own death. After these three kill me, they will certainly deal with you too in order to keep this ugly affair quiet. If you are wise, you will join together with me in order to break the barrier. My cave residence is near here, and so long as you help me break this spell formation, you will have nothing to fear from them once we arrive there. If it is to your liking, I can even make a devil heart oath and will compensate you heavily when we leave. Han Li raised his brow when he heard this, as the yellow-robed man's words had left his heart particularly sullen. It would be best for fellow Taoist to clearly understand what there is to gain before he takes action. If you help him, don't blame us if we act ruthlessly afterwards. You should understand the might of both parties, not to mention that it will be extremely difficult to escape from our sand formation. Surely you don't want to die here with him? My conditions are quite simple. You only need to wait here for a little while, and when the time comes we will release you. I'm also willing to swear a devil heart oath on this. King Glorious Blaze looked at Han Li and addressed the yellow-robed man's threats by saying, fellow Taoist, do not be coerced by them. Soon my reinforcements will arrive. So long as you protect me for a short while, you will have nothing to worry about. Han Li's appearance was the surprise factor that could tip the scales in the favor of either side. At the moment, Han Li had his arms crossed with a pensive expression. When Master Wild Sand heard King Glorious Blaze, an ominous glint appeared in his eyes, but he forced himself to remain still. Although this youth hadn't fully displayed his abilities, Master Wild Sand didn't dare to underestimate after the golden lightning he displayed earlier. Under these circumstances, he could no longer continue to hide his plan and spoke bluntly, Brother Glorious Blaze, could it be you haven't discovered the 7 devil wind seeds and 3 yellow earth fiends? In the instant you left your tomb, fellow Taoist Heaven Wind and I placed a spell formation outside of it. Your reinforcements should still be trapped in the tomb. Although it's possible they'll be able to break through it, they're going to be stalled for at least half a day. Besides, hee. With that said, he began to let out a cold laugh. Besides what? King Glorious Blaze's heart grew sullen and he glared at the large man while clenching his fists. Master Wild Sand looked up at the sky and sneered. Besides, it's currently almost noon and the eruption of Yin Qi in the earth veins will soon arrive. Brother Glorious Blaze, your heavenly corpse arts will suffer a great loss in power as a result. King Glorious Blaze's expression froze and a faint layer of black qi appeared around him. With a fierce smile on his face, he furiously said, good, very good. I didn't think that you knew about both my heavenly corpse arts and the earth veins Yin Qi. However, these are mere superficial details. I'll have you personally witness the might of my heavenly corpse arts. With no hope of reinforcements, he flew into a fury and began to unleash his strength, unresigned to just sit there and wait for death. Of course, unless he did this much he wouldn't be able to win over Han Li. King Glorious Blaze promptly spat out a ball of black blood that formed a fist-sized black talisman character before shooting onto his forehead and leaving a distinct mark behind. The talisman character released a black demonic light, causing the old man's body to release roiling gray corpse chi while he began to savagely roar. Although Master Wild Sand didn't know what ability he was trying to use, he wouldn't allow him to easily finish. He immediately shouted, attack. We don't need to hold this off any longer. After shouting, he stomped on the giant gourd beneath him. The gourd faintly trembled and spouted yellow sand, condensing into a 10-meter-tall flood dragon in the blink of an eye that fiercely pounced towards King Glorious Blaze. When the other two saw this, they took action as well. A white gale suddenly roared and released over 100-foot-long wind blades. Each blade shone with dazzling white light and let out astonishing shrieks. As for the cloud of devilish chi, it released over 10 flying sabers. Each of them glowed profusely with jet black light, and quickly grew from only an inch in size to 3 meters as they streaked through the air. Under the concealment of the wind blades, the sabers were nearly undetectable. Just as these attacks were about to strike King Glorious Blaze, he finished casting his technique. He howled in rage and his crown flew into the air, hair wildly blowing in the wind as it instantly grew several times longer and turned black-purple. In addition, he crossed his arms as he grew a meter taller, as a thick 3-inch-long layer of green fur appeared on his body and viciously sharp purple-black claws extended from his fingertips. The purple light was particularly effective against mist-type creations, but it completely went through the sand without a trace. Han Li frowned and wore a vigilant expression. The giant sword streak condensed from his flying swords chopped through the huge wave of sand, leaving a giant hole in it. As King Glorious Blaze was being attacked by several magic treasures, he saw Han Li move to break the formation and rejoiced. But then he hurriedly shouted a warning. Be careful, Soulfall Sand is specialized in corrupting magic treasures. Corrupting magic treasures? Han Li was stunned when he heard this. Just as the sword streak cut open a hole through the sand, a Yin wind blew out from it, carrying specks of black sand all around the huge sword streak. Then strands of black chi shot out from each of the grains of sand, wrapping around each and every one of his flying swords. As soon as the black strands touched the swords, Han Li felt his connection to the flying swords grow dim as his spiritual sense strands were being forcefully pushed out from them, causing him to gradually lose control. Han Li's complexion turned cold and he pointed at his flying swords, uttering, "Burst." Pangs of thunder repeatedly rang out and countless arcs of lightning shot out from the swords. They ripped the black threads apart and even opened a large empty space in the cloud of sand. Han Li narrowed his eyes and stared deeply into the cloud before wearing an unsightly expression. At the center of the cloud, there was a dense mass of sand floating in the air. It appeared to be unremarkable, but it was immensely large and wasn't something that could be destroyed in a short amount of time. During his hesitation, his expression grew sullen and a pair of silver wings appeared on his back. As thunder rang out around him, he suddenly disappeared and blurred over 30 meters away. A scarlet halberd then swept past where he originally stood. Although he was now a safe distance away, Han Li still sensed its scorching heat and was enraged by the attack. After missing its attack, the halberd began return to the devilish cloud in spin. Han Li raised his head to coldly look at the devilish cloud, and his eyes flickered with blue light. Although the devilish cloud was extremely dense, his bright-side spirit eyes were able to clearly see through it. The azure-robed old man inside of the cloud returned Han Li's gaze with an alarmed expression. He was greatly surprised by Han Li's use of lightning movement. Without another word, Han Li flapped his wings and disappeared in a ring of thunder. The old azure-robed old man was yet again stunned by the sight of this, but as someone who had experienced many battles, he slapped his storage pouch out of reflex and released an azure shield from it. In the instant the shield moved to protect him, silver light flashed from the side of the devilish cloud, followed by Han Li's appearance. His hands were held in a fist and golden lightning flickered all around him. In a series of thunderous explosions, a layer of golden lightning condensed on his body. Then with a blur, Han Li once again disappeared from view. This time the old man felt his heart drop and instantly opened his mouth, spitting out a sparkling green sword. As soon as it appeared, it flew circles around him in a green streak to protect him. Still feeling ill at ease, the old man thought to release several more magic treasures, but he suddenly heard thunder ring from his side. Arcs of golden lightning violently leaped about 10 meters around Han Li, brilliantly setting him ablaze with golden light as if he were a lightning god that had descended upon the world. The cloud of devilish chi nearby was cleanly wiped away to leave an empty area over 30 meters wide, revealing the azure-robed old man that was previously hidden within it. Ah! The old man couldn't help but shout as he realized that things had taken a turn for the worse. His body promptly flashed with light as he hurriedly streaked away. But since Han Li had taken the risk of approaching the old man with lightning movement, he wasn't about to allow him to easily leave. Han Li turned into a blur as he left a string of afterimages in his wake and raised his hands into the air, releasing a ball of purple flame and a streak of golden light. When the old man saw Han Li move so quickly, he was greatly frightened. Unable to do anything else, he hastily erected a wall of azure light from his shield and the purple fireball burst as it struck the wall of light. With a crackle, the purple flames rapidly spread across the wall of light, quickly covering the wall in a layer of thick ice and sealing the old man's azure shield within it. The old man couldn't help but shout in terror, "What is this tyrannical technique?" Then the golden streak of light arrived. With a crack, the golden streak disappeared the instant it struck the wall, only for it to suddenly arrive in front of the old man. The old man quivered and unconsciously attempted to lean to the side with all his might. Suddenly he felt a shock run through his shoulder, followed by unbearable pain. He quickly glanced at his side in terror and found that his arm had been torn off by the golden streak. If he hadn't reacted as he did, he feared it would have been his head instead. After slicing off the old man's arm, the golden streak circled in the air before shooting into the sky, revealing its true form as an inch-long golden sword. The old man then turned around and saw a tiny hole in the wall of ice. He found it hard to believe that the golden sword was sharp enough to pierce through both the wall of light and the ice covering it without the slightest resistance. The old man let out a gasp of surprise from what had happened, and his heart was filled with furious alarm. He quickly slapped a talisman onto his body and sealed the wound from his missing arm. Then he gritted his teeth as he glared at Han Li, wanting to repay him 1,000-fold for cutting off his limb. But just as the old man looked at him, Han Li suddenly disappeared without a trace. Not good. When the old man saw this, he felt his heart drop into an icy abyss. He looked around only to catch no trace of Han Li, and quickly reached for his storage pouch to release a protective treasure. However, he was too late. The old man heard a nearly indiscernible sound from behind him, and the light protecting his body was completely broken, followed by a palm covered in purple flames bursting out of his chest. Purple ice condensed around his body and completely sealed him within. The old man felt sharp pain stab through his body, but he wasn't able to move in the slightest, filling him with complete terror. Afterwards, Han Li withdrew his hand from the old man's body and enveloped the frozen body in a net of lightning with a casual flick of his sleeve. The lightning ruptured and inch-large chunks of purple ice rained from the sky. Then, a nascent soul wrapped in black light suddenly flew out from the scattered ice, attempting to flusteredly escape with instant movement. However, Han Li was already prepared for this and spat out a bolt of lightning. In an instant, the nascent soul was trapped by a net of lightning before it could activate its instant movement. Han Li smirked with icy intent and formed an incantation gesture with both his hands, ordering the golden net to contract and rupture. We'll only be able to block the sand with our own cultivation. However, his magic power will certainly be strained from controlling this much soulfall sand and can't keep this up for long. So long as we endure these several attacks, nothing else will come of it. Both he and Han Li were now in the same boat, and he had no wish for such a powerful ally to encounter mishap. Although Han Li had managed to scatter the black sand the first time with his golden lightning, he wasn't sure that Han Li would be able to block an attack of this intensity. As Han Li floated in the air, he muttered expressionlessly, "Soulfall sand? From the dense yin qi the sand possessed, it seems to be a magic treasure refined with souls. It is no wonder why they possess such might." When King Glorious Blaze saw that Han Li hadn't made the slightest move to protect himself, he found it odd, but he couldn't afford to pay any more attention to Han Li as the black sand was approaching. He opened his mouth and spat out fist-sized balls of light gray corpse flames. The flames condensed together into a huge fireball and protected him from the incoming sand. He could only rely on the corpse flames he had cultivated for countless years to block the oncoming storm of soulfall sand. Shortly after, a cloud of black sand covered him. Shining black sand and gray corpse flames flickered with light upon collision and occasionally released explosions of great intensity. As King Glorious Blaze prepared himself, Han Li was slowly withdrawing from the center of the formation. A moment later, he found that he couldn't move any further away and slapped one of the pouches on his waist with a raised brow, releasing a black streak of light. The black streak circled in the air before landing in front of him to reveal a black monkey that was several inches tall and wore an expression of dissatisfaction. It was the weeping soul beast that Han Li had forcibly called out. It was in a poor mood from having its cultivation interrupted while it was still absorbing the corpse flames inside the Vajra barrier. But after the weeping soul beast sniffed at the air and swept its gaze all around, it revealed sudden delight. Without the need for a command from Han Li, it beat its chest and let out a low-pitch whistle. Blinding black light shined from its body and it massively grew in size, transforming into an enormous ape over 30 meters tall. The image of the ghost face could be clearly seen on its back, and it moved around the weeping soul beast's body as if it were alive. Be it King Glorious Blaze, who was striving his hardest to block the sand, or the other two that were waiting for an opportunity in the distant cloud of sand, they were all shocked upon seeing the astonishing appearance of the weeping soul beast. Just as they wondered why Han Li had summoned this mysterious spirit beast, the huge ape snorted and released a cloud of yellow light from its nose. The cloud circled in the air and spread out, enveloping both Han Li and the ape inside of it. The cloud of black sand eventually arrived beside them in overbearing fashion and completely surrounded them. Then the sand immediately released a mass of dense black chi around the cloud of yellow light. As soon as the black chi was released, the previously hidden shining black grains of sand were completely revealed from the cloud of sand. When the huge ape saw this, it couldn't help but grin as it puffed out a beam of golden light from its nose. The beam of light swept past the cloud and absorbed the grains of black sand without the slightest resistance before shooting back into the large ape's nose. Then in the blink of an eye, beams of golden light swept past the cloud of black sand several times and completely scattered it. The cloud's yin chi was absorbed by the yellow cloud of light and wasn't capable of approaching Han Li in the slightest. Lord Heavenwind's plans were completely stifled and could only helplessly follow. The two hastily cast incantation gestures and flew alongside the cloud of black sand as it gathered together in the sky before taking off into the distance. During that entire time, neither Lord Heavenwind and Master Wild Sand had made another appearance. As Han Li stood on the shoulders of the huge ape, he stared in the distance with a cold expression. As his time was limited, he would have released the Heaven Void Cauldron if the battle showed no signs of coming to an end. Given how the cauldron sealed the endless sky Saintess spirit sand, dealing with this cloud of sand shouldn't have been a problem, but the main cause for concern was that the Heaven Void Cauldron was a divine spirit treasure. Although few cultivators outside of the scattered star seas should recognize it, he was unwilling to reveal it to others. Else if someone were to realize what it was, there would be no end to the trouble ahead of him. When King Glorious Blaze saw that Master Wild Sand and Lord Heavenwind make a complete retreat, he felt great relief. However, the corpse flames on his body remained ablaze as he saluted Han Li, saying, "Fellow Taoist's abilities are vast. You were actually able to break through the soulfall sand. It was an eye-opening experience. I must thank you for the kindness of saving my life." When Han Li heard this, he shot an appraising glance on the 10,000-year-old corpse monarch and wore an expression of indifference. The mist of sand had quickly retreated, but the corpse monarch's condition was far from good. The spiritual chi released from his body was less than half of his original state. It appeared that spitting out his corpse flames to block the soulfall sand while he was heavily injured came at the great cost of vitality. Although King Glorious Blaze was an unordinary cultivator, with his heavy injuries and Han Li's recent display of power, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart as he grew more wary, fearing that Han Li would turn to attack him while he was weakened. As for the huge ape underneath Han Li, it stood in place with half-closed eyes ever since the mist of sand left, as if it were savoring the feeling of the large quantities of black sand in its stomach. At that moment, Han Li immediately sensed King Glorious Blaze's hostile gaze and met his stare. Then the weeping soul beast opened its mouth and clicked its tongue at King Glorious Blaze, looking at him as if he were something tasty. King Glorious Blaze felt his blood run cold at the sight of this. After seeing the ape easily swept away the soulfall sand and realizing how fearsome it was, he felt a faint sense of dread. He guessed that the beast was a natural nemesis of his nature and inwardly cursed as a result. When Han Li had examined him, he sensed a corpse chi that was present in the Vajra barrier, and from his name King Glorious Blaze, Han Li managed to piece together his identity. The refined corpse that Jin Yuan had mentioned was actually the corpse monarch before him. But after forcefully using the Great Development technique to clear his mind, Han Li pondered about how time he had left until the Soul Lock seal took effect once more, the possible secret techniques that King Glorious Blaze still possessed, and the abilities he revealed in his recent display of strength. He would no longer be able to catch him off guard, and even with the assistance of the Weeping Soul Beast, his odds of slaying him in the short time he had left wasn't very high. After a moment of deliberation, Han Li forcefully stifled his killing intent, But since he ended up saving him in passing, he wasn't about to allow this opportunity to pass him by. Breaking the tense atmosphere, Han Li's expression relaxed and he slowly said, "Although my show of force was a result of their own actions, I did end up saving your life. Didn't you say you were going to compensate me? I am quite interested in how you're going to do that." Han Li didn't believe himself to be an upright man of honor, and with the baleful qi backlash coming closer each day, he wasn't about to spare this gravely injured corpse monarch. King Glorious Blaze relaxed upon hearing this and chuckled, "I don't have much on me. Only a few spirit stones and other materials. If it is to your liking, we can return to my cave residence and I'll be sure to pay you in full." After staring at him for a while, Han Li calmly said, "There is no need to trouble you so much. However, I have taken a liking to your golden pearl. Would you be able to gift it to me?" King Glorious Blaze's expression grew sullen, but after he looked at the huge ape, he forced a smile and said, "Do you mean this item?" Then he opened his mouth and spat out the golden pearl. Han Li indifferently nodded upon seeing it. This item is called a heavenly corpse pearl. It is a treasure that is formed after a corpse monarch refines the heavenly corpse arts. This isn't something that can be easily revealed to others. If I guessed correctly, the two demons of Fangjian Mountain were most likely going after this item. King Glorious Blaze blinked and then smiled before pointing at the golden pearl in front of him, saying, "However, the pearl is no longer useful to me, so you can go ahead and take it." To Han Li's surprise, the pearl shot towards him and he reached out towards it, catching it in midair with the sudden appearance of a large azure hand. The old devil had simply given him the pearl? Han Li wrapped in the pearl in azure light and examined it with narrow eyes, finding there to be nothing wrong with it. When he mentioned this item, he intended only to haggle and see what King Glorious Blaze could give him. This sudden turn of events left him bewildered. Han Li felt as if lightning struck through his mind and wore a doubtful expression. When King Glorious Blaze saw this, he hesitated for a moment before taking the initiative to explain, "Please don't feel this is strange, fellow Taoist. Although this is a heavenly corpse pearl, it isn't the one that I cultivated. When I first acquired the heavenly corpse arts, I obtained this corpse pearl as well. As my own heavenly corpse pearl is extremely important, I conceal it in my tomb instead of carrying it on me. So it was like that. In that case, I'll be taking this." Han Li nodded his head in realization, but just as he thought to ask something else, his expression stirred and he raised his head to look into the distance, then saying, "It seems your men have arrived. I will be taking my leave." Before King Glorious Blaze could say anything, Han Li's body glowed with azure light and he streaked through the sky. The old devil glanced at Han Li's departing figure with a wavering expression, skeptical of Han Li's words. But soon he heard ghost wails screaming in the distance and a green cloud that surged across the horizon. King Glorious Blaze was delighted to see them. Now that Master Wildzen and Lord Heavenwind have retreated, he had nothing to fear. He then turned into a streak of grey light and flew off to welcome them. At that moment, Han Li was streaking through the sky at the speed of lightning. He didn't dare to waste the remaining time he had left before the soul lock seal went back into effect. He needed to shake off King Glorious Blaze and the other two heretical cultivators, or else he would face them with his cultivation sealed. With Han Li's magic power temporarily restored to full strength, he was able to fly with incredible speed. By the time his magic power was sealed once more, he had arrived at a mountain range thousands of kilometers away, having changed direction several times along the way. Han Li sighed with relief. Having recognized his location, he then calmly took off on his flying magic tool. 2 days later, Han Li dropped down on a small desolate mountain. Soon after, he released several magic tools and easily carved out a cave residence. As a finishing touch, he placed down a concealment spell formation at the entrance. Han Li walked into the cave residence's sealed room and sat down cross-legged. "You plan on comprehending the bright jade arts here?" Monarch Soul Divergence suddenly broke the silence. "What? This place won't do?" Han Li asked. Monarch Soul Divergence snorted and said with an annoyed tone, "There isn't a spirit vein here. By the time you finish cultivating at this speed, my soul will have already scattered." "Hee. Senior, please don't be angry, I was only joking. I've already comprehended a portion of the bright jade arts along the way. Fortunately, the first layer of the technique doesn't have large requirements for spiritual qi. I reckon I'll be able to cultivate it in a year, but the second layer will be much harder to cultivate and requires a large quantity of spiritual power. I will find a spirit vein when the time comes, or it will take unbearably long. And to eliminate the possibility of a baleful chi backlash, I will have to cultivate the first 2 layers of the bright jade arts. Han Li then continued, although there are many spirit veins in the Great Gene, they will all be taken, even the inferior ones. And since I plan on quickly recovering my magic power, I will require a spirit vein of appropriate quality. It would be best to sneak into a large sect and quietly cultivate the technique there. From your tone, it seems you already have a plan. Monarch Soul Divergence said with a curious tone. That's right. I already have a target and I won't even have to forge an identity. Oh, that's quite good. How about you tell me about it? Monarch Soul Divergence asked with surprise. It's quite simple, Han Li explained. Among the deeds inside of the Feng clan's secret cave, there were a few documents mixed together, detailing a few secret affairs of the Feng clan. It just so happened that the Feng clan master had prepared an escape route for the clan's disciples many years prior, creating a completely unrelated background as a rich merchant clan in the Nan province. This wealthy merchant clan has over a dozen successful businesses, but it was actually something the Feng clan had nurtured in secret. The clan is simply a front while all power and control belongs to the Feng clan. Now that the Feng clan is extinct, I'll be able to use this wealthy clan as cover and enter a large sect in the region. In only 3 years I should be able to free a majority of my strength from the baleful chi and I'll be able to safely search for your materials. So it was like that. That seems like a good idea, but why have you stopped here? You plan on cultivating the first layer of the incantation? I do plan on completing the first layer of the bright jade arts. I want to see if there are any problems with cultivating it. And I also want to take advantage of this desolate area to make that Vajra barrier recognize me as its master and turn that crystallized demon core into a flying needle. But more importantly, I will have to deal with these items first. Han Li sighed and with a flip of his hand he summoned a white and a golden pearl into his palms. They were the heavenly corpse pearl he had just acquired from King Glorious Blaze and the snow crystal pearl he acquired from the 9 Immortals Palace disciple. 1. In Chapter 893, one of the Foundation establishment cultivators, a renegade 9 Immortals Palace disciple, had snuck away with the snow crystal pearl. Han Li became drawn into the situation when the 9 Immortals Palace attempted to exterminate the caravan. Needless to say, the snow crystal pearl is a rarely seen isotribute treasure, and it has yet to recognize a master. If I manage to refine it and nurture it, it will certainly benefit the purple apex flames. And since the heavenly corpse pearl is so heavily desired that even mid-nascent soul cultivators wouldn't hesitate to kill for the treasure, it must be valuable. Does Senior know how to use it? After some thought, Monarch Soul Divergence said, this item involves demon and ghost Dao cultivators, so I don't know too much of it, but I do know a bit about corpse pearls as a result of their large reputation. Items of these nature are something only corpse monarchs can produce from cultivation. Cultivators that rely on body refinement techniques will see this as a miraculous body purification medicine. After it is swallowed, it will slowly nurture a cultivator's constitution and have their tempered body surge in strength. Once the pearl is completely refined, one's body will be as durable as a corpse monarch. Given that the name of this corpse pearl is the heavenly corpse pearl, its effects should be unordinary. That King Glorious Blaze most likely cultivated a body cultivation technique. Han Li lowered his head to look at the golden pearl and hesitantly asked, swallow it? To refine this magic treasure I'll have to refine it inside of my body? Of course, it isn't so simple that you can directly refine it. Corpse pearls are extremely poisonous. You will need to first prepare a kind of spirit liquid to remove the poison from it. Although the materials to create spirit milk is rare, I recall that you should already have the materials on hand. It is possible that the pearl could greatly benefit the cultivation of the bright jade arts. I'll duplicate the liquid on a jade slip for you. Take a look. So it was like that. Many thanks for the trouble, Senior. Han Li said with a smile. A jade slip shot out from the bamboo tube on his back and Han Li caught it, then immersing his spiritual sense into it. A short moment later, Monarch Soul Divergence then asked in a strange tone, Youngster Han, haven't you forgotten about something important ever since you escaped from the Mulan Plains? Han Li withdrew his spiritual sense from the jade slip and asked with a confused tone, Something important? What does senior mean? Monarch Soul Divergence sighed and said, could it be you've forgotten? Your divine spirit treasure, that small cauldron, has something sealed inside of it. You means to say the incarnation of the holy endless sky beast? Hanli replied with a smile. Monarch Soul Divergence chuckled and said, that's right. Ever since you put away the beast, haven't you left it alone? Could it be that you're overlooking it? Overlooking it? Of course not. In fact, I've attempted to deal with. However, I will only be able to bring out the cauldron once my magic power has recovered. It is natural that you don't know of it. What did you do? Monarch Soul Divergence curiously asked. Hanli responded with a wry smile. What could I do? The cauldron isn't something that I can easily take out, and the beast's capture was far beyond what I could have anticipated. I was only able to use my spiritual sense to communicate with the beast. What was the result? Monarch Soul Divergence asked with great anticipation. Hanli let out a gloomy snort and said, the beast hasn't been in this world for long and it doesn't possess much intelligence. I cannot communicate with it. Monarch Soul Divergence indifferently said, that is normal. However, since the beast was formed from the spiritual sense of a creature from a greater realm, I reckon that its intelligence will fully develop in several years. It won't be too late to deal with the creature later. Then all I can do is wait. It is a pity that the endless sky saintess cauldron is also sealed inside of it. The might of its spirit sand makes it an extremely powerful treasure. It seems that her cauldron was an imitation of the Heaven Void cauldron. Hanli said with a pitiful expression. The saintess cauldron doesn't seem to be a magic treasure specialized in combat, unlike the Seven Flame fan. If you are able to collect enough materials to form the imitation that I devised, the fan will certainly be above that of the endless sky saintess's cauldron. I can't wait to see it. Monarch Soul Divergence said with a cold smile. Perhaps. Hanli had no objections over the claimed power of the altered Seven Flame fan. Regardless of their shape or form, fire attribute treasures were most likely specialized in attacks. After all, fire attribute's spiritual power was unrivaled in destructive power amongst the elements. After Monarch Soul Divergence finished speaking, Hanli said nothing else and lightly waved his sleeve, tossing the two pearls into the air and striking them both with a spell seal. Gold and white light began to glow from the two pearls as they floated motionlessly in the air. Hanli blinked and proceeded to slap his storage pouch, suddenly taking out an assortment of bottles and boxes and suspending a small cauldron in the air as well. With his hands in an incantation gesture, he pointed at the cauldron, causing it to tremble as its lid shot up into the air. The lid then flew a circle before suspending itself midair. Meanwhile, one of the jade boxes opened itself, revealing a pile of overflowing green dust. Hanli blew a mist of azure light onto it, and in a flicker of light, about half of the powder was brushed into the air by the light and flew in a circle before entering the small cauldron. Then with a soft shout, a slim thread of azure flame shot out from his mouth. Despite the meager size of the flame, the small cauldron was immediately ignited upon contact, wrapping its bottom half in roiling fire. But after Hanli released this flame, his complexion paled as his strength had weakened. Hanli couldn't help but wryly smile. He didn't think that forcibly extracting a thread of nascent flames while his magic power was still sealed would prove so challenging. Of course, this was also in part due to the grave injuries he received in the Mulan Plains that he had yet to fully recover from. 1. While Hanli was in the Mulan Plains, he was ambushed by a late nascent soul cultivator and have yet to fully recover since. Then he pointed at a slender jade bottle and had it slowly float over to the small cauldron. The lid of the bottle opened by itself and poured a stream of green liquid into the cauldron, instantly fusing with the green powder. Hanli uttered an incantation and struck the azure flames into the cauldron with a spell seal, causing it to surge in strength and cover the entire cauldron. After only a short moment, a faint medicinal scent emitted from the cauldron. Hanli's brow stirred and he waved his hand. A jade box then flew halfway into the air and a stalk of fire-red spirit grass flew out from it and directly into the cauldron. Then as time passed by, Hanli added more materials into the cauldron at regular intervals with meticulous control. A day later, the refinement process was complete. Hanli swept his sleeve and caused the nascent flame lighting the cauldron to disappear. Then the cauldron slowly flew through the air and onto his hand. Han Li lowered his head and looked into the cauldron, seeing an extremely dense liquid that was several inches deep. It was translucent emerald green and had a strong fragrance. After looking at it for a moment, Han Li saw that it was exactly the same as the jade slip described. Then he cautiously asked, "Is this spirit liquid acceptable?" "That is it," Monarch Soul Divergence slowly said. "I didn't think that your pill refinement techniques have reached such a profound level. It appears to exceed even mine when I was at my peak. I originally believed that you would fail at least 2 times before you could refine the spirit liquid. After you immerse the heavenly corpse pearl in the liquid for an entire week, the corpse poison will be entirely extracted. Afterwards you may consume the pearl as you wish." Han Li smiled when he heard this and pointed to the golden pearl that was floating in the air. In the blink of an eye, it shot into the small cauldron and the lid soon followed it down, rigidly sealing it inside. Then as brilliant light flickered, the light repeatedly revolved around the treasure, but the golden bubble didn't react in the slightest. Han Li wore a pensive expression when he saw this and then quickly formed an incantation gesture and uttered an incantation. Streaks of spell seals followed, striking at the Vajra barrier, but apart from a few ripples from the bubble, nothing had changed. Han Li's expression changed when he saw this. With his current knowledge and abilities, those were the only 2 types of treasure possession methods that he knew of. After letting out a long breath, he repeatedly formed different hand incantations and his voice fluctuated in intensity as he uttered more incantations. A series of rainbow spell seals then struck the Vajra barrier with flickers of his fingers, but the Vajra barrier still showed no sign of change. "Senior Soul Divergence, what's going on? Although my current cultivation is only at foundation establishment stage, I should still be able to put this treasure under my ownership." Monarch Soul Divergence calmly said, "Vajra barriers are a protective treasure refined by corpse flames using Buddhist crystal relics. It was a treasure that was originally rarely seen as crystal relics and corpse flames would mutually oppose one another. It should come as no surprise that ordinary treasure possession techniques wouldn't work. How about you try and use the incantations I gave you for possession of the Vajra relic?" "Alright, I'll give it a try." Han Li agreed without another thought. After half a day had passed, Han Li used his newly learned spell seals to force the Vajra barrier to shrink and fall into his hand, much to his relief. However, if he wished to finish the refinement process for the Vajra barrier, it would prove quite troublesome. Not even his nascent flames would be able to temper the Vajra barrier, and Monarch Soul Divergence didn't have any answers to this problem as well. According to Monarch Soul Divergence musings, the final step of the Vajra barrier's refinement process would require myriad-year corpse flames. When Han Li heard this, he couldn't help but roll his eyes and gloomily snort, "Myriad-year corpse flames. Are you suggesting I go to the Snowmound Mountains and deliver myself to King Glorious Blaze?" When Monarch Soul Divergence heard this, he snorted back in response but remained silent afterwards. Just as Han Li felt completely helpless over the matter despite having already acquired the Vajra barrier, the weeping soul beast sitting on Han Li's shoulder suddenly spat out a wisp of gray-white flames from its mouth out of boredom, striking at the Vajra barrier floating in the air. The originally still Vajra barrier then let out a series of groans as the flames engulfed it and began to fluctuate in shape within the gray flames. Han Li was greatly shocked by the sight of this. "Myriad-year corpse flame." Monarch Soul Divergence muttered in amazement. At the border of the central and northern portions of the Jin Empire laid a region that was ranked among the smallest in land of the 36 regions of the empire but was also ranked the top 5 in terms of wealth. There were many fields and rivers amassing a great amount of wealth, and there were many large regions of spirit mountains as well. Mortals on those mountains would even commonly see immortals dressed in Taoist and Buddhist robes fly off into the horizon. Needless to say, Taoism and Buddhism were prevalent in the region and their temples were profusely found throughout. Regardless of one's standing or wealth, they would always pay great respect to either of these schools. But in addition to these 2 prevalent schools, one could see the influence of many Confucian schools in the many cities and towns in the area. There were 39 of these Confucian schools, with one of the largest of these schools consisting of experts of Confucian teachings with many government officials in their ranks. On the other hand, the smallest of these schools only had ordinary Confucian instructors that could only explain the most basic aspects of Confucianism. If they felt that any of their disciples were outstanding, they would be recommended to a higher school, granting poorer disciples a good opportunity to advance. After all, Confucian scholars that graduate from a high-grade Confucian school were welcomed to the higher echelon of the Jin Empire. Confucian scholars that stem from the highest schools are even heavily recruited by nobility of all ranks. The Taichung Prefecture's capital city, Taichung City, was the location of one such of these prestigious Confucian academies. Although the city wasn't ranked amongst the best in the empire, it was one of the centers of commerce in the Nan province and was where the rich and powerful took residence. There were 4 families titled as nobility that resided in the city as well as countless people of every trade. In the Taichung city's west side resided the Gan clan, a clan of particularly wealthy merchants. They possessed over 20 restaurants in their prefecture's cities. In smaller cities they were hegemony of wealth, but in Taichung City, they were simply among the many elites that resided there. But even among the elite, the Gan clan did own a particularly large estate in the district where the wealthy resided and had over 40 servants in their employment. One day as the sun blazed at noon, a youth in Confucian robes slowly walked down a street. The young man appeared in his early 20s and wore a package on his back that was thickly wrapped in gray cloth and covered in dust. As he walked down the street he repeatedly looked around and soon spotted the Gan clan's glossy gate. When he read the words Gan Estate, he unconsciously smiled. When he approached the gate he examined it for a moment before pounding the iron door. Thud. Hurried footsteps arrived from the other side of the gate. The gate cracked open to a middle-aged man wearing servant robes who had a respectful expression on his face. When the servant saw the youth, his respectful expression suddenly froze before quickly fading away. He stood up straight and asked with a doubtful tone, "Who is your esteemed self looking for?" He then examined the youth as if trying to make out his origins. The youth cupped his hands in a salute and smiled. "Is this Uncle Ganqi's residence?" After examining the quality of the youth's clothes, his original display of contempt had disappeared. Instead he was now greatly alarmed after hearing Han Li speak and he respectfully said, "Uncle Ganqi? Ganqi is the esteemed name of my master. Then young sir must be." "I am Han Li. Uncle Ganqi is a distant relative of mine. I have made this trip to pay my respects to him." Han Li continued to smile as he spoke. It was now a year after he had cultivated in wholehearted seclusion. During this time he drawn the aid of the heavenly corpse pearl and the Vajra relic to refine the first layer of the bright jade arts. With that done, the roiling baleful qi was mostly calmed, much to Han Li's delight, but it still remained a priority for him to deal with. As such, he had hurried over to the Gan clan for the next step in his plan to rid himself of the baleful qi. After a moment of hesitation, the middle-aged servant said, "So it was young Sir Han." Unfortunately, the master had left in the morning to meet with his colleagues. Currently, the eldest young master is in charge of the residence. "Shall I make a report to him?" "Please, I must thank you for the trouble," Han Li calmly replied. "Please wait a moment, young sir. I will immediately make the report." The middle-aged man bowed and closed the gate before heading back. Han Li idly stood in front of the gate and examined the surroundings of the huge estate, occasionally catching sight of a few carriages that passed by. Although he hadn't swept his spiritual sense past the city, it was clear there were a large number of cultivators in it. Furthermore, there were many areas that housed many high-grade cultivators. This was rather odd to him as he couldn't fathom why these cultivators would have such a high interest in the mortal world. After the time it took to finish a cup of tea, the door creaked open to reveal an embroidered-robed youth with a refined appearance. Standing behind him was the servant from before. After the youth gave Han Li an appraising look, he courteously said, "You must be Sir Han. I'm Gan Yu. I heard that you were a distant relative of the Gan clan. Although I've never heard of this before, I cannot forget my manners. If you'd like, will Sir Han like to follow me to the living room? So you're the son of Uncle Gan. Since you've given me the invitation, I will not refuse it." Without another thought, Han Li promptly agreed. With a faint smile, Gan Yu stepped to the side and welcomed Han Li inside. Then the black gates silently closed. 2 hours later, the Gan clan master, a plump 50-year-old man wearing blue noble robes named Gan Qi, returned to the Gan estate by carriage. Gan Qi looked at the gatekeeper below the carriage and asked, "Has anything happened while I was away?" The middle-aged gatekeeper sincerely replied, "Lord, there is a young man surnamed Han that had arrived. He claims that he is your nephew and is waiting in the living room with the young lord." They seemed to be having an excited conversation. Just as Gong Qi stepped off the carriage and approached the estate gate, he paused and muttered, "A nephew? Surnamed Han?" A trace of doubt could be heard from his voice. "What? Is this person a fraud?" In his alarm, the gatekeeper hastily suggested, "Shall I call for the guards? It's hard to say if he's truly a fraud. I do think I have such a relative, but it has been quite some time so my memory fails me. Continue to guard the gate." Outside of Taichung City, there were many unremarkable Confucian schools, one of which was a mid-grade school by the name of Pure Revelations Academy. If there was anything notable to say about it, it was that it was constructed on the renowned Jadefield Mountains. These mountains were a renowned spirit mountain range in the Taichung Prefecture with over 10 various peaks. Although it wasn't particularly steep or imposing, it had favorable weather throughout the year and beautiful flowers blooming all over. There were also many rare spirit trees and fruits that can only be found there, causing them to be ranked as the greatest of the 13 spirit mountains in the region. The Pure Revelations Academy was constructed on the Jadefield Mountains' illusory cloud peak. The academy, which could hold over 1,000 people, was constructed across the entire upper half of the mountain. It is said that this academy didn't have the qualifications to establish themselves on such a famous mountain, as the other mountains were filled with famous and renowned temples that were clearly superior existences compared to it. But strangely enough, when the Pure Revelations Academy was constructed over 1,000 years ago, the Taoist temples in the vicinity hadn't opposed them in the slightest. Rather, the priests and monks would treat the students of the academy with great courtesy ever since its establishment, much to the astonishment of the locals. Another odd thing about the academy was the disparity of the ages of the disciples they recruit, ranging anywhere from 6 years old to well over 20 years old. And each year they would recruit disciples at 3 to 4 times at irregular intervals. There were times where they would go 4 or even 8 years without recruiting anyone. In addition, many of the people that are accepted are rarely seen walking out of the front gates, adding an air of mystery to the academy. Of course, these were only viewed as mysteries to the mortals that inhabited the bottom half of the mountain. Since they didn't know any better, they believed Pure Revelations Academy to be completely unremarkable as their name was hardly heard of throughout the region. One day there were 2 people that were slowly climbing up Illusory Cloud Mountain. One of them was a middle-aged scholar with a dignified appearance, and the other was a scholar around the age of 20s who had somewhat tanned skin and a common appearance. He was Han Li, who had appeared at the Gon estate a month prior. The middle-aged scholar walked forward with fluttering sleeves, saying, "Esteemed nephew Han, the Pure Revelations Academy had finished recruiting disciples 2 months prior, but I heard from old fellow Gon that you've learned an assortment of Taoist techniques and know of the existence of cultivators. As such, I've brought you to this academy for a test. It will be up to destiny to see whether or not they will take you in. Since I share a friendship with the academy's senior teacher Lu, I've brought you over to see him. If he finds you acceptable, you may remain at the academy." "Yes, I've heard of your arrangements," Han Li replied with a sincere tone. "Uncle Gon have already spoken of them. Regardless of whether the academy takes me in, my uncle will take this favor to heart." At that moment, Han Li's body released the aura of the 4th layer of qi condensation. Ordinary cultivators would be unable to see through his true cultivation. A month ago he had requested Gu Qi, the Feng clan's agent, to assist him in joining any large cultivation sect, regardless of their affiliation. The reason why he bluntly said this was because the Feng clan gave him past orders to particularly befriend cultivators that entered the mortal world for future use. As a result, Gong Qi was able to fulfill the request without much difficulty. But what worried Gong Qi was the possibility of Han Li holding malicious intentions and possibly implicating the Gong clan. But this is no surprise, as those with spirit roots are only found 1 in 10,000 people. It is only a pity that I don't have spirit roots either, or I would have also entered the Pure Revelations Academy in pursuit of the path of cultivation. Han Li smiled and tacitly remained silent. Afterwards, Teacher Yen spoke no further and brought Han Li forward. As they traveled up the mountain, they were able to see a mountain peak in the sky. They also heard resonant and melodious bell rings that shook the spirit of those who heard it. Teacher Yen paused and turned to look the illusory cloud peak. He shook his head and muttered, "The Treasure Spirit Temple's clear hum bell is a truly rare treasure, but it seems the senior monk in charge of the temple is rather excessive to strike it 3 times in a single day." A bright glint flickered from Han Li's eyes when he heard that there was a Buddhist sect on the mountain and then wore a pensive expression. He soon realized that this so-called treasure was actually a top-grade magic tool, nothing that was particularly rare. He wrapped up his long sleeves and held them behind his back and proceeded to follow after Teacher Yen. Soon the two arrived at a platform at the center of the mountain, and then the scenery suddenly opened before them. They saw a verdant, lush, emerald-green forest of bamboo in front of them with sightings of red and white buildings in the distance. There were also several white stone paths that led directly into the bamboo forest. Teacher Yen glanced at the forest and said, "Let's go. The main entrance usually isn't open. Follow me to the side gate." He then brought Han Li to the side and walked down another road. After many turns, Han Li and Teacher Yen appeared at a pitch-black gate that was 3 meters tall. Teacher Yen sighed and lightly knocked on. The gate silently opened to reveal a young man in white Confucian robes. "Ah, so it was Teacher Yen. Have you come to find Senior Teacher Lu?" The youth had spiritual qi fluctuations at the 3rd layer of qi condensation, but he still spoke to Teacher Yen with great respect. Han Li couldn't help but look better of Teacher Yen when he saw this. In the heavenly south, such a situation would have never happened, Han Li thought with a cold chuckle. It seemed Confucians were quite strict with their rules, causing even cultivators to bow their heads to mortals. However, this would probably only occur with low-grade cultivators. This definitely wouldn't happen with a high-grade cultivator. "Yes, I've come to see Brother Lu. Is he present?" Teacher Yen calmly asked. The white-robed youth pondered for a moment and said, "He is currently seeing an esteemed guest in his study. I will make report that you've come." "That is fine. Sorry to trouble you," Teacher Yen said with a smile. Although the white-robed youth knew that he was immortal, he also had a deep friendship with Senior Teacher Lu and didn't dare to slight him. After a polite word, he hastily took out a voice transmission talisman, uttered a few words into it, and sent it into the air as a streak of fiery light, soon to quickly fly off without a trace. Not long after, Han Li detected a powerful spiritual sense sweep past them before immediately disappearing. Han Li's heart stirred, knowing that this most likely belonged to Senior Teacher Lu. From the level of his spiritual sense, he appeared to be an early core formation cultivator. This had come as a surprise as he expected him to have late foundation establishment cultivation at most. In Han Li's point of view, the lower his cultivation the better, as it would be less likely for him to see through his disguise. Soon, a spiritual qi trembled in the air above them and a man's voice indifferently sounded out. "Is it Brother Yen? I am currently seeing a guest. But Brother Yen may as well come in. And you may bring that young friend of yours as well." When this was said, the white-robed youth led Teacher Yen and Han Li inside. After walking through a pathway for a short while, they passed through several courtyards where Han Li heard sounds of paper and flipping pages, exactly as one would hear of an ordinary academy. Although it was named as such, why would low-grade cultivators waste their time studying instead of cultivating qi? When the white-robed youth saw Han Li's surprise, he smiled and explained, "These are our lower academy disciples undergoing their noon studies. To enter the upper academy, one would not only require spirit roots but the cultivation of the noble spirit. After all, most Confucian techniques draw on the aid of noble spirit. The greater and firmer one's noble spirit, the farther one will reach in their cultivation, greatly expanding their future prospects." Since Teacher Yen had brought along a young cultivator with seemingly similar cultivation to his own, the white-robed youth decided to take the initiative to befriend him. "So it was like that." Han Li replied to this show of kindness with a smile. At that moment, the three were walking through an area filled with pavilions. After making several turns, they arrived at a small serene courtyard. The sounds of turning pages suddenly disappeared as soon as they walked inside, clearly a result of a soundproofing restriction. Teacher Yen didn't show the slightest difference when this occurred. He seemed to have been there before. As for the white-robed youth, he didn't dare to enter and had bid them farewell outside of the courtyard gate. When he saw the youth disappeared into a pavilion at the side, Teacher Yen tidied up his clothes and approached the largest room with slow steps. But just as he stepped forward, a light knock sounded from the door and it opened itself. Then Senior Teacher Lu's voice sounded out from above. "Brother Yen, please enter. I was just keeping Royal Serenity Monastery's Nun Hualyan company. Allow me to introduce you to my brother Yen." "The Royal Serenity Monastery?" Teacher Yen revealed a trace of shock, but he walked in without any further hesitation. Han Li closely followed after him. Once they entered the reception room, they saw a man and a woman sitting inside. The man appeared over 40 years old and had a thin face with long facial hair. At a glance, one could tell he was an extremely shrewd and calm individual. The woman appeared to be in her 20s, wore yellow Taoist robes and had fair skin and black hair. From her magnificent poise and grace, one could tell she was a Taoist nun. When Teacher Yen and Han Li entered, the two swept their eyes past them. Before Teacher Yen could even speak, the young Taoist nun smiled and called out to him, "So this is the famous Teacher Yen Yao? Although this humble Taoist pay no attention to the mortal world, I have heard of the great fame of the magnificent Harmony Academy's Teacher Yen." Then she swept his gaze past Han Li and paid no further attention to him. The woman was only a late foundation establishment cultivator, but she was exceptionally calm and at ease in front of Senior Teacher Lu. It was clear she was someone of great background. Teacher Yen didn't dare to be negligent and hastily saluted her. "I don't dare to accept your praise. I've heard of your grand name long ago as well. It is a pleasure to meet you, Nun Hualyan." Junior greets these two seniors. Han Li took half a step forward and saluted them as well. Senior Teacher Lu blinked and calmly asked, "Who is this young friend?" "This is my esteemed nephew Han," said Teacher Yen, "a distant blood relative of my good friend. Because he mentioned the reputation of the Pure Revelations Academy, I couldn't turn him down and brought his nephew here to see if he has the qualifications to be a disciple of the academy." Senior Teacher Lu looked at Han Li and after a moment of silence he calmly said, "Oh, he's the nephew of Brother Yan's good friend." Han Li belittled his tool refinement techniques as much as he could. Simply mentioning this would greatly influence his odds of entering the sect, but showing true skill would just be asking for trouble. Also, there are far fewer people capable of pill refinement and spell formations compared to tool refinement. It would be far too eye-catching to mention the other two. "Fellow Taoist Han, you understand tool refinement? That is great. Senior Lu, it seems I won't need to borrow any tool refinement disciples from your sect. Since this fellow Taoist Han has yet to be a disciple here, how about he enter the Royal Serenity Monastery?" The Taoist nun's suggestion came as a great shock to both Han Li and Teacher Yen. Teacher Yen couldn't help but sternly say, "Nun Hualyan, this isn't very appropriate. Your monastery is for nuns. How can a man like Han Li enter?" The Taoist nun pursed her lips in a smile and said, "Although the Royal Serenity Monastery is a female institution, there are a few fire tribute Taoist priests and men that have entered our sect, but they reside outside of the monastery, so there is no need for Teacher Yen to worry." So it was like that. I knew far too little of the Royal Serenity Monastery. However, esteemed nephew Han wishes to enter Pure Revelations Academy. It is still inappropriate for him to enter your sect. Teacher Yen seemed set on having Han Li enter the academy. Despite clearly knowing that he was facing an existence beyond his own, he still decided to raise a dispute. Unconcerned, Nun Hualyan smiled and explained, "With fellow Taoist Han's aptitude, even if he were to enter your academy, he would only be a common disciple with no future prospects. However, my sect is preparing to refine many treasures and we are currently lacking a low-grade disciple that understands tool refinement. So long as he is willing to enter my monastery, your tool refinement techniques will improve and I will even make sure that your cultivation will be looked after. I won't conceal this from you, Teacher Yen, but I've come to borrow a disciple from the academy that understands tool refinement. Now that one has appeared before me, I no longer have to trouble fellow Taoist Lu." Teacher Yen hesitated for a moment and then turned to Senior Teacher Lu asking, "Brother Lu, what do you think?" With a calm expression, Senior Teacher Lu said with a deep voice, "Young friend Han had yet to be a disciple, so he is still free. It is naturally up to him if he wishes to enter the Royal Serenity Monastery or the Academy, but it is as Nun Hualyan says. Even if he were to enter the Academy, I cannot offer him any assistance, and she has come to borrow a low-grade tool refinement disciple. Entering the monastery isn't a bad choice at all. With that said, the three in the room turned to look at Han Li with worry, curiosity and even excitement. Royal Serenity Monastery? When Han Li heard this name, he recalled it to be a Taoist monastery on Jadefield Mountain. However, he hadn't known that was a female monastery and didn't know much about it. He found himself at a complete loss. The offer had thrown Han Li's plans into chaos. He didn't know anything about this sect, or if it would be as fitting for him as the Pure Revelations Academy. Additionally, if he refused such a good offer and entered Pure Revelations Academy regardless, he feared he would attract the suspicion of senior teacher Lu. As such, Han Li couldn't help but roll his eyes at Nun Huayan's offer and repeatedly cursed in his heart. Senior Huayan, I will be honest to you. I don't know much about the Royal Serenity Monastery. But since it is a female monastery, it shouldn't be very accommodating in terms of cultivation methods and techniques for male cultivators. As Han Li's thoughts quickly stirred, he found something wrong with the situation and was barely able to raise an objection. Nun Huayan smiled and calmly said, "So it turned out Junior Han was worried over this matter, but there will be no problem. Our Royal Serenity Monastery is only a branch of the Three Royals Monastery. There is also our brother branch, the Royal Yang Monastery, which is our male counterpart. There will be no lack of male cultivation techniques for you. I've also noticed that your body is lacking noble spirit qi. You would have to cultivate this new qi after entering Pure Revelations Academy, so our cultivation techniques should be much easier for you to cultivate. Of course, if you manage to cultivate Confucian sects to completion, you will be able to employ abilities far beyond Taoist techniques. But this is too early to speak of for fellow Taoist Han. Could it be that you believe the Royal Serenity Monastery to be beneath you?" Senior teacher Lu calmly added on, "Fellow Taoist Huayan's words are reasonable. Our Confucian techniques are slower than even Buddhist techniques at the beginning. Young friend Han, it seems more suitable for you to enter the Royal Serenity Monastery. Since fellow Taoist Huayan has agreed to look after you, you have a chance of achieving foundation establishment if you accept her offer." When Han Li heard this, he was completely speechless. It seems he had no choice but to deviate from his original plan. Fortunately, the Royal Serenity Monastery also shares the spirit veins of Jadefield Mountain. So long as he was careful, nothing strange should happen. With that thought, Han Li could only accept his bad luck. With feigned excitement, he said, "Since both senior had made this recommendation to me, this opportunity must be good. I will agree to it." After hearing this, Nun Huayan nodded and senior teacher Lu silently smiled. As for teacher Yen, he couldn't raise any opposition to his agreement despite his wishes for Han Li to enter the Confucian sect. With this matter settled, the four chatted in the room for a moment more, speaking not of the fantastical tales that occurred in the cultivation world but rather the changes of the Great Jin political court, much to Han Li's bewilderment. It wasn't too surprising with regards to the Confucian sects as their interests are tied to the mortal world. But he found it rather strange for a monastery nun to talk about politics with even moderate interest. Could it be that the Royal Serenity Monastery was also a cultivation sect that was involved with the mortal world? Han Li couldn't help but ponder about this. As conversation in the room was continued with vigor, footsteps sounded out from the outside and a young voice said, reporting to Martial Ancestor. "As per your orders, I have brought the purple essence copper from the storehouse." "Oh, bring it in," senior teacher Lu said without another thought. Purple essence copper. Han Li's heart stirred. This or was an outstanding material for refining top-grade magic tools and treasures. It might not be particularly valuable to Han Li, but it was undoubtedly a rare item to those in front of him. As Han Li thought this, the room doors were pushed open to reveal a fair child that was 12 years old. He walked in with a large red tray covered with a bulging silver cloth. Then he respectfully placed the tray on the table in front of Nun Huayan and senior teacher Lu. Senior teacher Lu glanced at the boy and calmly ordered, "You may leave. There is no need for you to wait here." The child acknowledged the command and deeply bowed before heading out of the room. Afterwards, senior teacher Lu promptly handed the tray over to Nun Huayan. Then with a smile he said, "Fellow Taoist Huayan, this is the purple essence copper we are lending to you. Your monastery has looked everywhere for this material. It appears you truly plan on refining a precious treasure. Could it be a top-grade magic tool or a magic treasure? Nun Hualien hesitated for a moment and then apologetically said, "This isn't very clear to me. I am only following the orders of 4th Senior Nun. If Senior wishes to know more about this, it would be better for him to ask her. They should tell you the truth." When Senior Teacher Lu heard the mention of 4th Senior Nun, his expression changed for a moment and then he responded with a chuckle, "There is no need to do that. It was only a passing question." Nun Hualien smiled and lifted the cloth off of the tray, revealing a pile of golden stones glowing with purple light. She grinned after she saw the tray full of purple essence copper and uttered a word of thanks before taking it into her storage pouch in a sweep of light. With her objective fulfilled, Nun Hualien uttered a few more words with Senior Teacher Lu before taking her leave. He didn't urge her to stay and promptly called for the child to lead Nun Hualien out of the academy. Han Li bid his farewell as well and followed after the woman. After Han Li and Nun Hualien left, silence filled the hall. Teacher Yen and Senior Teacher Lu didn't speak for some time and simply looked at each other in silence. Teacher Yen in particular had a troubled expression. Senior Teacher Lu eventually broke the silence and spoke with a sullen, emotionless tone. "How are your preparations? In order to deal with that monster Niu Tianda, I will have to rely on my essence-joined devouring arts. Now that we are at the final strand, do you have any second thoughts on keeping your life?" Teacher Yan's expression turned sullen and he snorted, saying, "So long as I am able to take revenge for the extermination of my clan, what is the cost of a single life in comparison? My sole worry is that after you finish cultivating your ability, you would be unwilling to provoke the old devil out of fear for his fierce flames." Reminded of his family, he clasped his hands with force, deeply sinking his fingernails into his palm. Senior Teacher Lu wasn't angered by his words and calmly replied, "Hee. Why does Brother Yen have such doubts towards me? Didn't I already say once you assist me in cultivating this ability, I will inherit your body's noble spirit qi which will contain traces of your resentment? If I don't eliminate this Niu Tianda, there will come a day I will no longer be able to use this qi. In order to make sure that I can still make use of it, I must eliminate him. Besides, does Brother Yen feel that there is anyone else that will assist you in killing this wretch? And someone that has no fear of retaliation from the Black Yang sect?" Teacher Yen pondered for a moment, then saying, "You're right. Although I've strived to make friends with a few cultivators over the years, none of them have abilities or cultivation as vast as Brother Lu's, and only you are willing to assist me in getting revenge for the extermination of my family. It isn't that the others aren't capable, but that they're unwilling to provoke one of the 10 great Devil Dao sects on the behalf of a mortal like me." Naturally, Senior Teacher Lu sighed, that Niu Tianda is an external affairs enforcer of the Black Yang sect. How could a small sect dare to provoke them? Confucian sects like ours were always at odds with the Devil Dao, so there is no fear of worsened relations. In a show of my sincerity, I have agreed to every one of your requests in the last 5 years. This clearly illustrates my kind intentions. Teacher Yan's expression turned icy and he coldly stared at Senior Teacher Lu in silence. Seeing that Teacher Yan wouldn't yield, Senior Teacher Lu wryly smiled and helplessly said, "Fine, in order to set Brother Yan's heart at ease, I am willing to face the portrait of our noble sage and swear a heartlock oath. In the future, if I do not fulfill my oath, my noble spirit qi won't progress in the slightest." Teacher Yan let out a long sigh and his brow twitched. Then with a stiff expression he said, "Good, that will do. Then don't hesitate to use this body to assist in your cultivation. It isn't that I can't trust Brother Lu, but as the sole surviving member of the Yen clan, I cannot help but be more cautious." Senior Teacher Lu waved his hand and calmly said, "I naturally understand why Brother Yen is being difficult. The cultivation arrangements will take place in 1 month. Please finish making your funeral arrangements before returning to the academy." Teacher Yen nodded and the room sank into silence once more. Then he suddenly broke the silence and asked, "That's right, why did that Royal Serenity Monastery nun had to take away Han Li? Could it be that the academy didn't wish for another tool refinement disciple?" Senior Teacher Lu casually smiled and said, "I was merely using the situation for my own benefit. The treasure that the Royal Serenity Monastery is refining should be quite important. They are lacking even subordinates to refine materials. Although our academy can lend low-grade tool refinement disciples to Royal Serenity Monastery, we will find it difficult as we don't know what they will be subject to. With the appearance of young friend Han, we were able to fulfill their request without troubling the sect. When Scholar Yen heard this, he calmly let the matter drop. If he felt truly ill over the matter, he would have pressed his friend further. Meanwhile, Nun Hualien was bringing Han Li along on a scarf magic tool. They were flying toward a shorter point of illusory cloud peak. Han Li and Nun Hualien were standing in a secret room filled with an assortment of materials. There was a red-faced early Foundation establishment cultivator appraising Han Li with a tight frown. This is Elder Wei, one of the two great tool refinement masters of our Three Royals Monastery. You will be assisting Elder Wei for the time being and will hone your tool refinement technique in passing. Rest assured, we won't truly have you become a tool refinement master since we're lacking in resources to do so. It is only because we will soon refine an important treasure that we require a bit more assistance. So long as you perform well in these 3 or so years, I will reward you with medicine pills and personally provide you cultivation guidance. Naturally, I will not go back on my promise. Han Li didn't say anything further and only nodded in response. Elder Wei then said in an annoyed voice, "Fellow Taoist Hualien, does this martial nephew truly understand tool refinement? Isn't his age and cultivation too low? Didn't you say you went to Pure Revelations Academy to find a suitable assistant?" Nun Hualien replied with a smile. The refinement of this treasure is vastly important, so it would be better to not let other sects involve themselves. Martial nephew Han's cultivation and experience may be shallow, but with Elder Wei's directions, there should be no problem for him to perform material refinement. With no better alternative, Elder Wei unhappily said, "Even refining materials will require talent, or else it will result in destruction of the materials. But since fellow Taoist Hualien has mentioned it, let's have this youngster stay here for the time being. Don't worry, my judgment isn't that poor. His magic power is remarkably pure despite his low cultivation. At the very worst, his control of magic power and tool refinement techniques shouldn't be too poor." Elder Wei examined Han Li once more and a trace of astonishment appeared on his face. So it was like that. He does have a bit of potential. It seems fellow Taoist Hualien hadn't brought any random person to me. Since I've already brought the person you need, the refinement process should take less time. Compared to the other 2 monasteries, our own monastery is lagging behind in progress. We mustn't delay this great affair by any means or we'll be to blame. I will be taking my leave. Elder Wei saw her off and promised, "Be at ease with the youngster, matters will definitely not be delayed." When Nun Hualien heard this, she departed with satisfaction, leaving Han Li and Elder Wei behind in the hidden room. With no trace of kindness in his voice, Elder Wei then sternly said, "You should have listened to what we were saying. Regardless if you are interested in tool refinement or if you have any talent, I will diligently instruct you on the Tao of tool refinement for a month and then I will assign you to your tasks. So long as you complete my assignments at the end of every month, you may use the rest of your time as you wish. But if you don't finish your assignments, I will send you away and find someone more appropriate to take your place in the tool refinement hall." "Yes. This disciple will strive his hardest," Han Li replied with a calm expression. Han Li's attitude was to Elder Wei's satisfaction. With a relaxed expression, he led Han Li out of the secret room and said, "Of course, being a disciple of our tool refinement hall isn't without its benefits. Not only does the hall have a few magic tools and earth-fire reservoirs that can be used for free, but we also give our disciples more spirit stones at the end of the month than the other halls. Follow me and I'll introduce you to your fellow disciples. In the future, there will be a few materials that you will need to refine together with them." After Han Li was introduced to 3 other qi condensation cultivators, he was arranged a residence in passing. Then Han Li's cultivation in the Royal Serenity Monastery had begun. The so-called Tool Refinement Hall was located at the middle portion below the monastery's peak and was a courtyard completely separated from the main monastery. There weren't many buildings. Apart from the Earthfire Hall and several buildings for tool refinement, there wasn't much else to speak of. The hall's disciples are even required to live in nearby caves. Apart from the 4 lower-grade tool refinement disciples that included Han Li, there were 2 middle-aged cultivators at the 8th and 9th layer of qi condensation that acted as Elder Wei's assistants. Given that there were only 7 people in the entire tool refinement hall, the small space that it occupied was more than enough. Day to day, many male and female disciples of Royal Serenity Monastery would arrive to either rent a magic tool or directly request the hall to refine various magic tools. And since it was a female monastery, a vast majority of the disciples were female, but not all of them were nuns. There were quite a few young women that had gorgeous appearances that suggested they came from wealthy backgrounds. Under Han Li's calm observation, he discovered that the other 3 tool refinement hall disciples were completely captivated by the female cultivators that would pass through despite being worked to the bone every day. But since their cultivation had been struck at a standstill, they knew that they would only be able to curry favor by refining magic tools. The few male disciples that would stop by were much like the tool refinement disciples. They were disciples that lived outside the monastery and were responsible for researching spell formations, refining medicine pills and other such tasks. As for the female disciples, they were wholeheartedly focused on cultivation. Han Li inwardly disapproved these circumstances, but he wasn't about to meddle in these affairs. Furthermore, the other 3 disciples were in charge of looking after the other disciples. As for Han Li, he was focused on learning how to refine and purify materials. Every day, Elder Wei would spend 2 hours imparting a few tool refinement basics and would even personally give Han Li a demonstration. With Han Li's original knowledge and cultivation, he didn't believe he had anything to learn from a foundation establishment tool refinement master. But in a few days he was given quite the shock. Although Elder Wei's cultivation wasn't high, he had high attainments on the Tao of tool refinement. From purifying materials and tool refinement techniques, he seemed to have studied the secret tool refinement techniques of many sections. There were even tool refinement skills and knowledge that Han Li hadn't heard of before. In a short 10 days he greatly benefited from this unexpected surprise. It seemed there was a reason why the Great Jin was lauded as the holy land of cultivation. The tool refinement master of an unremarkable Taoist monastery was able to grasp so many tool refinement methods ranging from those preserved since ancient times and new techniques researched from successive generations of tool refinement grandmasters. The simple tool refinement techniques of the heavenly south and scattered star seas couldn't be compared. It was a truly eye-opening experience. To tell the truth, Han Li's current tool refinement technique was rather ordinary. The techniques he had acquired from Qi Yunxiao were shallow in face of Han Li's current cultivation and knowledge. After his time in the scattered star seas and the drifting cloud sect, he saw many jade slips regarding tool refinement techniques, but there were very few that were actually useful. Now that he encountered such a rare opportunity, he wasn't about to easily relinquish it. Outside of his time cultivating the bright jade arts, he was earnestly taking Elder Wei's teachings to heart, showing a great effort that was to the old man's satisfaction. Han Li even asked a few questions that were somewhat difficult for the old man to answer, causing him to unintentionally give a more detailed explanation. As a result, the old man's attitude towards Han Li vastly changed over the month. His cold demeanor was replaced with a friendly expression, much to the shock of the other 3 disciples who were well aware of the old man's nature. Envious, they treated Han Li coldly, but given how Elder Wei favored him, the 3 couldn't rashly stir up any trouble for him. This behavior was welcomed by Han Li. He had always been a solitary person and it would allow him for peaceful cultivation with no one to disturb him. A month later, in addition to the various methods of purifying materials, Elder Wei even taught him a few unique tricks for tool refinement and more, all of which Han Li kept in mind. Inspired by the knowledge he gained, he planned on immediately setting off to look for tool refinement techniques throughout the Great Jin as soon as he restored his magic power, later allowing for improvements to the 7-flame fan and Monarch Soul Divergence's puppet body and strengthening their power by an entire layer. At the end of the first month, Han Li was immediately given a set of assignments for material refinement as he was earlier informed, but he wasn't given tasks that were too difficult for his disguised cultivation. As a result, he was able to finish them with ease and spend the rest of his time cultivating the bright jade arts. 4 months passed uneventfully and Han Li found that entering the Royal Serenity Monastery was the correct choice. At the moment, Elder Wei seemed to be extremely busy. Apart from the tool refinement tasks that he gave to the 4 disciples at the end of every month, he was sealed inside the secluded room in the Earthfire Hall. Nun Hualyan did visit a few times during this period, but she would always hide away in the secret room to have a secret discussion with Elder Wei. The 2 were quite careful and would always release an alarm restriction for the duration. But since Han Li was set on diligently cultivating the bright jade arts, he ignored his curiosity over the matter and chose not to risk detection over an attempt to eavesdrop on them. One day Han Li was sitting cross-legged in meditation with the upper half of his body twisted in a strange position with his two hands formed in an incantation gesture as they lied against the mat on the ground. His body was covered in a layer of faint golden light that faintly vibrated. Under close inspection, one would find that Han Li's skin was densely covered in threads of visible veins and arteries. There were even egg-sized bumps that roamed across his body as if they were alive. Each time his body trembled, his face twitched and he revealed an expression of agony. As Han Li felt the intense scorching heat slowly fading away from his body, he opened his eyes and his face revealed a pensive expression. The bright jade arts was beyond overbearing. Despite having gone through the process of condensing a nascent soul and purifying his body, he was barely able to tolerate the agony of tempering his body, much to his bewilderment. "Senior, is there truly no problem with cultivating the bright jade arts?" Han Li asked Monarch Soul Divergence with a worried tone. "I'm cultivating only the second layer and it is incredibly painful. I can't believe those bald Buddhists all waited until they were at late nascent soul stage before they started cultivating this technique. Their lifespans would have reached their end if they cultivated this technique to completion. And how could core formation cultivators endure such anguish? The pain doesn't solely affect the body, but it can clearly be felt by their spiritual sense." Monarch Soul Divergence lazily replied, "Is there anything strange? Since the Buddhists had converted a demon clan technique into one of their own, they naturally researched methods to reduce pain as well. After all, Buddhist techniques were originally meant for those that adept in pain tolerance and perseverance. And with the additional willpower of a cultivator, it is possible to practice the bright jade arts. As for why this technique is so overbearing, it may only be that way for humans. This technique was originally meant for demons and elder devils, and given how strong their bodies are, the pain shouldn't be much to them." Han Li frowned and bitterly smiled. "That explains it. It is a pity I don't have the time to cultivate other Buddhist techniques and I'll have to forcefully cultivate through the pain. It is still tolerable at this point." Soon after, he raised his hand and pulled back his sleeve before examining his arm with blue light shining from his narrowed eyes. After the time it took to finish a cup of tea, he poked his arm and pulled his sleeve back down. He then muttered to himself, "Although I've suffered quite a bit, the bright jade art's tempered body is quite unique. This technique is far stronger than other body forging techniques that I know of. In a short amount of time, my body has undergone an astonishing change." Soon after, Han Li sat down quietly and emerged from the secluded room. A few days ago, when he was purifying his assigned materials, he combined the tool refinement techniques that Elder Wei had explained to him and came to comprehend a new tool refinement skill. As a result, he was able to finish the last step of the crafting process for the crystallized demon core, resulting in the completion of the flying needle. And during the past few days at noon, he also made use of the earth fire reservoir to further temper the flying needle and increase its might. Just as he was approaching the earth fire reservoir for another round of tempering, he suddenly heard the sounds of the march in the direction of the main gate. Han Li couldn't help but look in the direction of the sound. He saw a group of 9 young cultivators with the other 3 tool refinement hall disciples showing them in. The one in charge of the group was a young woman in emerald palace robes. She had a beautiful appearance and an unordinary temperament, but her eyes were filled with curiosity. Contrary to their age, these young cultivators possessed high cultivation for their age, at the 8th and 9th layers of qi condensation. The woman in palace robes possessed the highest cultivation of them, at the 10th layer of qi condensation. After Han Li swept his gaze past them, he recognized that their identities were sure to be high, as each of them wore bulging storage pouches at their waist. There were even 3 of them with spirit beast pouches at their waist. As for the 3 tool refinement hall disciples that were guiding them, they all wore a smile on their faces and appeared to be carefully fawning over the group as if in fear that they would offend them. Han Li blinked and promptly turned around, pretending not to see them as he made his way to the earth fire hall. But as it so happened, the tallest of the 3 tool refinement hall disciples happened to see him and loudly shouted out, "Junior Marshal Brother Han, come over here and help us. County Lord Wuxia wants a magic tool refined." There are a few materials that must be specially refined. This is a task that was personally brought by the fourth monastery lord herself. We cannot delay. County Lord? Fourth monastery lord? Han Li was greatly surprised to hear this and could only stop his tracks before turning around. Having stayed in the monastery for a while, Han Li had a general understanding of the high-grade cultivators of Royal Serenity Monastery. The monastery had 4 lords at core formation cultivation, and it was reportedly said that the sole nascent soul cultivator of the monastery resided in the monastery's clear heaven courtyard. Although the 4 monastery lords had reached core formation stage at a rather late age, it is said that their techniques were rather peculiar. And the abilities of the 4th monastery lord were the most famous of the 4, and she was known throughout the entire region. Senior teacher Lu of Pure Revelations Academy even had revealed shock at the mere mention of her name. But as each of these monastery lords were of high status, Han Li hadn't had the opportunity to see even one of them. Han Li walked over and gave the group of cultivators an appraising look before calmly saying, "Since it is the 4th monastery lord's orders, we must provide our assistance." When the group saw that Han Li's cultivation appeared to be only at the 4th layer of qi condensation, they looked at him with disdain. A blue-robed man from the group then bluntly said, "Are you able to refine the materials? Isn't your cultivation too lacking? The county lord requires a very rare material to be refinement, blood-veined silver. If the material is ruined, will you take responsibility?" County Lord Lucio pursed her lips in a smile, but her eyes flickered with a bit of doubt. Han Li was unflustered by his remark and replied with a smile, "Blood-veined silver is a truly rare material. I'm not confident in successfully refining it either, so it would be better for you to find someone more qualified." When the group heard this, they were at a loss of what to say. Eventually, a handsome man from the group recovered his wits and disdainfully snorted. "They said there was a formidable tool refinement master here. Why won't he come out and refine the materials for the county lord?" Marshal Senior Wei is occupied with refining an important treasure and has already spent several days in sealed seclusion. "I'm afraid that he will not be coming out," one of the 3 tool refinement hall disciples answered. "It will only take a moment to refine the materials," County Lord Lucio said in a soft voice. "Won't you senior marshal brothers assist me in asking Grandmaster Wei to come out? Even inside my estate I've long heard of his grand name. I wish to see him with my own eyes." Her noble beauty seemed to melt the hearts of the several tool refinement hall disciples. Han Li unconsciously frowned when he heard this. The woman appeared to be polite, but a trace of cunning could clearly be seen from her eyes. He coldly laughed in his mind when he saw this, but he remained silent. The 3 men had lost their calm when they heard the woman's soft voice and were enticed into agreeing. Han Li inwardly sighed when he heard this. If he remembered correctly, Elder Wei clearly stated to them that unless the matter was important, he and his 2 assistants were not to be disturbed in their secluded room. And given that the matter was material refinement, whoever would go to mention this to Elder Wei was sure to suffer. As expected, the disciple that went into the Earthfire Hall ran out with a pale complexion a short moment later. When he returned, he forced a smile and said, "County Lord Marshal Senior Wei truly cannot attend to you. It would be better for Junior Marshal Brother Han to give it a try. Since the Royal Serenity Monastery's tool refinement hall is so famous, why can't you 3 refine the materials for the county lord?" This time a different young woman from the group asked this with a smile. Her looks were above average and she had a small beauty mark at the side of her mouth. The 3 disciples exchanged an embarrassed glance and the tallest one then helplessly explained, "I won't conceal this from young Miss Mingzhu. If it were ordinary materials we would be able to refine them. But for materials as special as blood-veined silver, only Junior Marshal Brother Han was taught the refinement process by Marshal Senior Wei. Our main knowledge is only to refine common magic tools." County Lord Lucio's bright eyes blinked and she gave Han Li an understanding smile. "That will be a bit troublesome. We were brought here by Lady Yuzhu and can't stay for long. If I miss this opportunity, who knows when I'll be able to next find a tool refinement master capable of refining blood-veined silver. It seems I will have to trouble this senior marshal brother for assistance. All right, so long as the county lord is willing to take the risk, I will try my best," Han Li calmly said. She answered with a slight smile. "That is no matter. Please strive your hardest to refine it. If it fails, it won't be too bad." It'll just be a missed opportunity. I'll find some again later. Han Li nodded upon hearing this, but after glancing at the group of people in front him, he frowned and said, "When I refine materials, I can't have a large number of people observing me or I will be distracted." The county lord casually replied, "That's fine. When the time comes, only I will be with you. The others will wait outside, or perhaps they'll have these 3 senior martial brothers give them a tour of the area." Although her followers appeared unwilling, they raised no words of objections. Han Li then wasted no further words and led the way towards the Earthfire Hall. The girl then signaled her group to remain in place with her eyes. The Earthfire Hall was the most important structure of the Tool Refinement Hall. Although it only spanned a little over 300 meters wide, it was 3 stories tall. The top floor was the storage area for materials. The second floor was where one could directly use earthfire to refine materials and refine low-grade spirit stools. And the bottom floor was 100 meters pit into the ground where high-grade magic tools were refined with the assistance of earthfire essence. Han Li often used a secluded room on the second floor to refine materials and brought County Lord Lucio there to refine her blood vein silver. It was slightly cluttered, so he set off on tidying it up when they arrived. "This is where Senior Martial Brother Han refined materials?" County Lord Lucio curiously looked around the room and particularly focused her attention at the large cauldron and the 8 gourd magic tools that were scattered around it. It appeared this was the first time she saw a tool refinement site. "What? Has the County Lord never seen magic tools refined before?" Han Li asked with a slight frown. She reached out to touch the handle of the cauldron and said, "Ever since I was young, I've followed Aunt in cultivation and haven't had the time to learn about tool refinement. I usually remain in the estate to cultivate." Han Li glanced at the ashes in the cauldron and casually asked, "You cultivated in your estate? Could it be the Yu estate is located above a spirit vein?" The woman yelped in surprise and then curled her lips in a smile. "Could it be that Senior Martial Brother didn't know who I was? You truly don't know the royal clan that I claim my status as a county lord?" Han Li's heart stirred and he chuckled, saying, "I am quite ignorant and am unsure of your identity." "You're ignorant? That's great. There is no need for me to act as my position of county lord. To tell the truth, I only have distant relation to the Great Jin's royal family, but I've never seen the face of the Emperor of the Great Jin. I've always remained in cultivation with my master and have never visited the royal mansion." A trace of happiness flashed across the young woman's face, and her attitude quickly changed from the graceful poise of a noblewoman to a strangely spirited young woman. "Your royalty?" Han Li's expression changed in surprise. The young woman sat down in the lone chair in the room and tilted her head. Then with a smile she asked, "What? Are you surprised? My title of county lord is genuine, but it is only something that the emperor bestowed upon me. Were it not for the fact that my aunt said that I mustn't shame the face of the imperial family before I arrived, I wouldn't have dressed up in this fashion and wouldn't have that group of people bothering me. Their empty talk all day around is truly boring and tiresome. Currently, I am only able to relax around Senior Martial Brother Han. You won't be so tactless and start uttering nonsense, right?" Han Li let out a cough and said, "In that case I'll continue to talk as I am now, but it seems your esteemed ancestor is an unordinary person. Have you heard of the 4 great vagrant cultivators in the Great Jin? My grandfather is one of them." Lucio raised her head when she said this as if in pride. When Han Li heard this, his expression vastly changed and he astonishedly said, "The 4 great vagrant cultivators. Despite my ignorance, even I've heard of their fame. So it turned out the county lord is even more of an important person. I've been truly disrespectful. That identity is no lesser than your title as county lord. Your future prospects are boundless." He had heard of the 4 great vagrant cultivators from Chaomingrong. They were at late and mid-nascent soul stage, and each of them had abilities that far exceeded common nascent soul cultivators. "Yes, that's right. Everyone knows of my ancestor's name. I believe that's the way others should think of me." Lucio bluntly accepted Han Li's praise. Han Li stroked his nose and felt a bit of a headache. He paid no further attention to the woman and then struck the large cauldron with several spell seals. The cauldron began to roil and glow with light. The young woman didn't conceal her curiosity and glanced at the shining pitch-black stone with bright eyes, paying particular attention to Han Li's actions. Once the cauldron was fully activated, he turned to Lucio and said, "Take out the material." "Here." The young woman blinked and said with a smile, "I'll just tell you now that there is no need to speak politely in front of others. If Senior Marshal Brother truly fails and ruins this difficultly acquired material, you will have to compensate me." Afterwards she took out a fist-sized rock and handed it over to Han Li. The rock was sparkling silver, but it was mixed with countless threads of crimson. He looked at the stone in his hand and inwardly rolled his eyes at the young woman's giggling words. Let alone a qi condensation disciple, even a foundation establishment cultivator would be troubled to acquire a piece of this rare material. If he were a true qi condensation cultivator, it would be strange if he were able to compensate her. Han Li refocused his attention on the cauldron and tossed the rock into it. Then, after he placed several supplementary materials inside of it, he sat down cross-legged onto the floor. He proceeded to slap a talisman on his body and a layer of blue light appeared on his body. Following an incantation, the 8 gourd magic tools on the ground began to brightly shine with light and release 8 streams of scarlet flame onto the lower half of the cauldron. The temperature in the room began to suddenly rise. As Han Li was occupied with refining the blood vein silver, an old Taoist nun and a middle-aged woman were having a discussion in a secluded building at the top of the mountain. With a grave expression, the Taoist nun said, "We don't have much more time. Our royal family has spent over 400 years preparing for this already. 8 generations of monarchs had spent a painstaking effort to keep this plan hidden. If this fails, not only will we not acquire those 2 treasures but the entire royal family will suffer calamity. Our Yi clan may have amassed strength in secret, but if we were to truly clash with the Buddhists and other factions, we would collapse at the first strike. As for those rotten Confucians, they may say they loyally support the throne, but if we attract their attention, I fear they will be the first to act against our royal family. I have always felt our Yi clan have been playing with fire." The beautiful woman sighed and said, "Aunt, we all knew this, but this is a great opportunity for our clan to free ourselves from the other powers. And don't forget how our 7th great-uncle and the others had died. When they saw our royal family increase slightly in power, the many great factions immediately joined hands in dispatching several nascent soul cultivators to deal with them. Afterwards, they found a reason in passing as justification for the killings. If we don't break away from this horrible situation, our royal Yi clan will only be the top noble clan only in name, when in truth we are only an expendable resource that the great factions have agreed upon. So long as the legends are true and we truly acquire these 2 treasures, our painful efforts over the years will pay off and will force those superpowers to recognize us through power alone. They won't dare to attack us then." A cold glint flickered from the Taoist nun's eyes and she snorted, then speaking with a fearful tone, "Although legends in the cultivation world proclaimed the inconceivable might of divine spirit treasures, I have difficulty believing that 2 of these treasures will be able to completely turn the world around and put us on equal footing as these superpowers. I fear we'll overreach ourselves and attract calamity by stirring the superpowers into wiping us out. If I remember correctly, those superpowers should have treasures of a similar level. Although I don't know how many they have, a single one will have the capability of eliminating our Yi clan." The beautiful woman frowned and solemnly replied, "Deity transformation cultivators are rivalous in this world. Even with the divine spirit treasures, our 3 great ancestors would barely be able to defend against such monsters. However, there is no need for you to be too worried about this. Our Yi clan had secretly investigated this matter over 100 years ago. After much analysis, assuming the lifespan of those monsters are 1,000 years greater than a nascent soul cultivator, there have only been a few cultivators capable of reaching deity transformation stage in the last 2,000 years. A small portion of them may have succeeded and most of them should have ascended to the spirit realm, leaving only 2 or 3 in the mortal realm at most. Furthermore, these people must be paying an enormous cost to remain in the mortal realm. Not only are their movements restricted and cannot easily take action, but their cultivation should be forcefully suppressed to the late nascent soul stage as well. Furthermore, those monsters most likely won't have any interest in taking action over the rise of a faction." The Taoist nun's expression turned particularly more gloomy when she heard this. "How can you know of this? Don't tell me this is information that you've acquired from conjecture and a few questions. Over the years, Countless cultivators attempted to find out about the secret information of cultivators remaining in the mortal realm after achieving deity transformation, but all of them failed. How can you clearly understand this knowledge after only 100 years? Is your confidence an attempt to trick me? Or is there something that you aren't mentioning? Seeing that her aunt was angry, the woman hurriedly explained, "We have no intention of fooling you. Although this information isn't something that our Yi clan had researched, it is something that we acquired from an elder we recently recruited. His information was a complete match for clues that we collected, so it is fair to say that our Yi clan had managed to properly investigate the matter." Elder? When has the Yi clan acquired another elder? Is he a vagrant cultivator or someone from a small sect? Won't there be a problem? The Taoist nun quickly asked several questions in her alarm. "Don't worry, Aunt. This person isn't a cultivator from the Great Gene but a vagrant cultivator from the soaring sky plains. Their abilities are quite impressive, and we've already investigated this person's background and have found nothing wrong. They had offended the soaring sky temple and had to flee. Our clan had yet to reveal this matter to them." "Oh, that's quite good. Although I disapprove of your follow-up plans, the elders have already set the plan into motion. Those 2 divine spirit treasures must be acquired. We can only worry about what will happen afterwards and play it by ear, but you'll have to be careful from now on. Those superpowers have spies everywhere and our large movements are bound to attract their attention. We mustn't leak any information," the Taoist nun warned. The beautiful woman bitterly smiled and helplessly said, "We fear we've already aroused the suspicion of a few perceptive individuals. Over the past few days, the superpowers have dispatched many additional cultivators to bolster their ranks at the capital city." The Taoist nun's expression sank and she asked, "Were there any nascent soul cultivators among them?" "No, but the cultivators they sent were all at core formation stage. There are the same number of nascent soul cultivators watching over the capital city." "That will be fine," the old Taoist nun slowly said. "It seems they are only somewhat suspicious and they haven't truly sensed anything. Ever since the 3 Royals Monastery released information that it wished to refine an important treasure, it attracted much attention that would have otherwise put pressure on your side." After some thought, the other woman said, "Your orders were the correct choice. But it stands to mention that although the treasure being refined by the 3 Royals Monastery is only bait if it is successfully refined, it will be a great increase of our power. If it is possible, we should strive our hardest to create it." "I am well aware," the Taoist nun said, "the mountain-crushing seal is a treasure capable of splitting the earth. Even an imitation of it will be an outstanding weapon. If we manage to successfully refine it, it will be the equivalent of having another late nascent soul cultivator in our ranks. We must do our utmost to make sure that succeeds. On the other hand, I heard that your second uncle said that he wanted to recruit a few powerful vagrant cultivators. How is that going?" "He has set himself on recruiting vagrant cultivators for quite a while. 2 of the 4 great vagrant cultivators have already entered the service of the royal family. As for the other 2, they were too difficult to find, so they will be impossible to recruit. However, Luminous West Mountain's Ghost Monarch and the Myriad Demon Valley's Deputy Valley Lord Xiong are also willing to stand with us to escape the superpower's control. They should lend us a hand when the time comes. There are also small sects that have displayed goodwill to us as well." Afterwards, the old Taoist nun and the beautiful woman continued their detailed discussions as time slowly passed by. Inside the Earthfire Hall, County Lord Wuxia was staring wide-eyed at an egg-sized piece of silver that was wrapped in interweaving silver and crimson light. She wore an expression of delight. The woman fiddled with the material in her hand and spoke to Han Li with a smile. "Senior Marshal Brother Han, I didn't expect you'd be able to truly refine the blood-veined silver and at such high purity. Elder Wei must be quite accomplished to have a disciple as skilled as yourself. I ran across to the tool refinement rooms of many market cities, but none of their tool refinement masters were confident in their ability to refine this material properly." Han Li replied with a faint smile. "Marshal Senior Wei's tool refinement techniques aren't comparable to those of common tool refinement masters. Furthermore, I am not Marshal Senior Wei's disciple, but a temporary helper for the tool refinement hall. When the time comes, I will want to wholeheartedly focus on cultivation. My current tool refinement techniques are something that I only simply learned in passing. When the young woman heard Han Li, a sad expression appeared on her face. Is that so? What a waste. You have so much talent for tool refinement since you were able to purify blood vein silver. Since I've finished refining the County Lord's blood vein silver, I now have other important matters to attend to and cannot continue to keep your company. Just as Han Li began to tidy up the tool refinement magic tools in the room, he suddenly heard Wuxia say, "Please wait." She put away the blood vein silver and beamingly smiled. Could it be that I am so ugly that my appearance is forcing you to leave? And who said I only had that to refine? I still have other materials that must be dealt with. I didn't know how skilled senior martial brother was and I didn't dare to take them out. I now am completely confident in your skills. Afterwards she took out a foot-long jade box and handed it over to Han Li. He then felt his head ache. He weighed the jade box in his hand but didn't open it. Then with a bitter expression he said, "There are still more materials? The County Lord overestimates me. At my current cultivation I've already exhausted my strength refining just the blood vein silver. I will not be able to refine any further materials." So it was like that. Your magic power is too shallow. However, this item doesn't need to be purified. I only want you to help me in dealing with the material and reduce the decay of its spiritual nature. I must tell you that you can't speak of it after I show it to you. It is something that I acquired with great difficulty and I reckon there are few such of its kind in the world. What item can be so rare? In Han Li's astonishment he glanced at the jade box in his hand and curiously opened it. As soon as he opened the lid, a blinding red light suddenly shined out from it, blinding him. In his alarm, blue light shined from his eyes as he unconsciously activated the bright sight spirit eyes. This is. Both Han Li and the young woman shouted out at the same time in astonishment. The box had a translucent plume feather that was a half-foot long. It sparked with red light as if it was made from flames. The plume of a vast young bird? But this is quite different, Han Li muttered to himself as he stared at the box's contents. What is a vast young bird? This is the plume of a black phoenix. When my grandfather brought me across the sea to visit a powerful senior, I took advantage of the moment his spirit bird was asleep to secretly pick its feather. That stupid bird was dead asleep and didn't notice in the slightest. That's right, what's with your eyes? They had glowed with blue light. It's very interesting. Is it a magic technique? She then stared at Han Li's eyes, hoping that she would recognize something. But Han Li felt that something was off and had already cancelled the bright sight spirit eyes, preventing her from making anything out. At that moment he was staring at the plume feather and was having a discussion with Monarch Soul Divergence using his spiritual sense. The plume of a black phoenix? Isn't it a fire tribute spirit bird that was equivalent to the vast young bird? Could it serve as a replacement? Han Li solemnly asked. The black phoenix is only a divergence of the flame phoenix. The bird may have a bloodline that descended from antiquity and possesses amazing abilities, but it is unfortunate that the two materials are not interchangeable. With some modifications we can add in this plume and raise the power of the simplified 7-flame fan by an entire level. However, the spiritual nature of this feather has been greatly decayed. It is no longer a suitable material, Monarch Soul Divergence said with disappointment. Then with a baffled tone he added, but I find this quite impressive. When I toured the Great Gene in the past I've never heard of any eccentrics raising this bird. So it was like that. When Han Li heard this he felt greatly disappointed. At that moment, Wuxia was looking at him with an impatient expression. She was greatly curious about the blue light that Han Li released from his eyes. When he saw her expression he rubbed his nose and wryly smiled in his heart. With a calm expression he then slowly replied, "The reason why my eyes shined with light is because I used spirit water to cleanse them. This method only grants my eyes slight spiritual sight. It is only a minor art for low-grade cultivators like me." Wuxia's spirits were roused and eagerly asked, "What spirit water did you use to cleanse your eyes? Do you have more? Can you give me some?" The spirit water is only effective if it is used immediately after refinement. I've already used all that water I had. I fear I must disappoint you," he said with a regretful expression. The young woman blinked and pouted, displaying her doubt as she said, "Senior Martial Brother Han, are you telling the truth? Don't think that you can lie to me because I'm young. Han Li dryly laughed and then slowly said, all of my words are true. I don't dare to deceive you, County Lord. However, I do have something else that might interest you. The young woman was stunned when she heard Han Li's words and suddenly thought of something. With a crafty smile she asked, what will you trade for it? Don't tell me that you have eyes on my black phoenix plume. Han Li closed the lid on the box and wryly smiled. County Lord Lucio must be joking. How could a mere chi condensation cultivator dare to covet such a treasure? I merely wish for you to confirm something. The woman smiled and waved her arm in a bold display. Confirm something? That's easy. There's no need to trade. If you help me deal with the black phoenix plume, I will answer your questions the best I can. After some thought, Han Li nodded and said, all right. Let's do as you say. Two hours later, Lucio emerged from the hall and was met by her entourage, who had been impatiently waiting outside the hall. The three tool refinement disciples were sincerely waiting at the side, not daring to neglect them as the young cultivators of the entourage came from exceptionally high backgrounds. When the county lord emerged from the hall, her young entourage immediately surrounded her. County Lord, how did it go? Did that person ruin your blood vein silver? Questions were asked with great fervor. The young woman brushed aside the hair from her face and let out a sweet smile, saying, nothing went wrong. Many thanks for your concern. Senior Marshal Brother Han has already assisted me in refining the material and with great success. Her blatant demeanor from before was nowhere to be found. When Han Li walked out from the Earth Fire Hall, the corner of his mouth unconsciously twitched at the sight. Hee, youngster Han. You are truly cunning to coax the location of Black Phoenix from the young girl. Do you plan on heading to visiting the Island Lord for a Black Phoenix plume? Of course. Since it is a known method of reinforcing the Tri-Flame fan, I must do my utmost. I don't want to waste so many rare materials and hard effort on something of lacking power. After all, common ancient treasures don't have much of an effect on late nascent soul cultivators. They'll be staying at the Royal Serenity Monastery for the next few days. I'll be staying inside seclusion to avoid having my cultivation interrupted by them. Han Li spoke with an indifferent tone before heading back towards his residence. In the following 2 days, County Lord Lucio had quietly looked for Han Li, hoping that he would refine more materials for her. But Han Li had already placed a sign that he had already entered secluded cultivation and even placed a simple restriction in front of the door, causing Lucio to resentfully turn back with a pout. After 2 days passed, the county lord left the monastery and the entourage of young cultivators followed after her, leaving the tool refinement hall back to its usual affairs. As months slowly passed by, apart from occasionally refining a few materials, Han Li would wholeheartedly dedicate his time to cultivating the bright jade arts. The consistent completion of his refinement tasks earned him the increasing respect of Elder Wei, who found time to give Han Li further explanation on the finer points of material purification. Later on he would give a few rare materials to Han Li to refine. When Han Li noticed this, he punctually refined these rarer materials without the slightest delay, much to the astonishment of Elder Wei. Eventually, Elder Wei noticed Han Li's talent for tool refinement and assigned him even more tasks, occasionally finding more time to teach Han Li as well. During this time, Elder Wei was also occupied on the refinement of something and left a small portion of the materials over to Han Li to deal with. Not long after, Han Li astonishingly discovered that he was given rare earth attribute materials to refine. He couldn't help but feel shocked. There were sparsely few treasures that were completely refined by earth attribute materials, and most of them possessed astonishing strength. However, this had nothing to do with him. No matter the conditions, he would stick to his original plan and slowly cultivate to the second layer of the bright jade arts, faintly noticing astonishing changes to his body as time went on. One day, a few people from Pure Revelations Academy delivered a message to the Gon clan that Teacher Yen had suddenly passed away from a grave illness. Illness? When I last saw him, it didn't seem like he was ill. When Han Li found out about this, he found it to be quite unexpected. With his spiritual sense, he also sensed many foreign cultivators have recently appeared near the Royal Serenity Monastery and were secretly observing it. See if he has any connection to this disciple Han Li. Also call over that girl Huayan. I want to personally ask her about how she recruited this disciple. It seems we've fallen for a trap of pure Revelations Academy. We also can't have the speed of the tool refinement hall to decrease. We must finish refining that item in 3 years, or it will delay the great event. The old Taoist nun uttered these orders without the slightest change in expression. Yes, Martial Aunt. As you command. With repeated acknowledgments, the 2 yellow-robed nuns then bid their leave. When the old Taoist nun saw the 2 leave the building, she let out a long sigh before leaning back in her chair and slowly closing her eyes. 3 months later, in the Yi province's largest market city, a youth bought an unknown or at an unremarkable shop for the high price of 30,000 spirit stones. 5 months later, in the Fan Prefecture's Fan County Trade Fair, a masked cultivator purchased 3 pieces of firegrant wood for the price of 50,000 spirit stones. Half a year later, at the Feng province's Kailong Prefecture, a local mid-grade sect suddenly had an iron rhino horn disappear from them. They suspected that it had been stolen. 8 months later, the Chu region's top clan was suddenly paid a visit by a large mid-nascent soul cultivator with an ugly appearance. He wanted to trade a 1,000-year-old spiritual herb and a grade 7 demon core for the rainbow lightwood in the clan's collection. As a result, the clan master had his 2 nascent soul elders meet this nascent soul cultivator to turn him away. But as a result, the mid-nascent soul cultivator used his vast abilities to easily turn the elders into 2 blocks of ice. The clan master was shocked, and with no better choice, he was forced to agree to the trade. As a result, the large ugly man took the wood and tossed the spiritual herb and demon core onto the ground with howling laughter. The clan master then had to expend a great effort to free his 2 elders from the ice. Although their lives were still intact, they suffered a great loss in vitality. Over the short span of a year, a young man, masked cultivator, and a large ugly man began to appear all around the southern portion of the Jin Empire, collection various rare materials. The youth would buy strange materials that few could recognize. The masked cultivator repeatedly won auctions in great displays of wealth as if he had an endless stream of spirit stones. And the large ugly man would imprudently visit the various noble clans in the area as well as a few smaller sects, forcefully exchanging rare materials in their collections for his spiritual herbs and demon cores. Of course, it also stood to mention that larger sects would often have a few of their materials mysteriously disappear overnight. The youth and the masked cultivator were hardly noticed apart from some particularly sharp individuals. As for the large ugly man's forceful exchanges and the frequent disappearance of materials, they had caused great tremors in the southern portion of the Great Jin's cultivation world. The various cultivation sects were furious at the theft of their materials, and they dispatched disciples to find this mysterious thief. As for the large ugly man, the various sects backing the victimized clans had begun sending men to find the whereabouts of this imprudent mid-nascent soul cultivator. The Long province was a large province located on the western portion of the Jin Empire. It has tall and expansive mountains, areas filled with toxic miasma and venomous animals of all kinds. This province was different from other areas of the empire. Only the illustrious righteous Tao sect, the High Sun Palace, and one of the 10 great devilish sects, the Devilwood sect, ruled over this large area. No external powers were able to involve themselves with the province. As native cultivation factions only consisted of small sects and schools, they weren't able to pose the slightest threat to these 2 vast and powerful sects, and were forced to subject themselves under the control of either sect for protection. As a result, the region was split into the west and east. In the west was the Heaven Peak mountain range where the High Sun Palace ruled. The mountain range spanned over 100,000 kilometers of wilderness. The palace was located on a mountain named South Sky Mountain at the very center of the mountain range. Tens of thousands of the sect's disciples resided in the various mountains nearby. With the addition of the surrounding mountains acting as a natural fortress, no cultivators dared to attack the High Sun Palace. Even particularly reckless individuals were unable to break through the grand spell formation surrounding the mountain, which consisted of 13 layers of fearsome restrictions. But one day, when a group of High Sun Palace disciples flew out from the Heaven Peak mountain range, an azure streak suddenly flashed from the top of an unknown mountain nearby. There was an azure-robed youth that stood on a huge boulder with his hands held behind his back. He was silently staring at the group of disciples from behind. Monarch Soul Divergent's voice echoed through the youth's mind. Youngster Han, do you truly plan on acting against the High Sun Palace? The sect is amongst the top sects of the 10 great righteous sects of the Jin Empire. It doesn't seem wise to provoke them. Han Li indifferently said, I know, but we've already collected most the materials we need for the Tri-Flame fan. Now we are only missing the vast young bird's plume feather and the scarlet fire flood dragon's scales. We already acquired information from the market city that many ferocious flood dragons have begun devouring cultivators on the eastern coast of the Jin Empire, and there seemed to be a red flood dragon amongst them. Even if it isn't the scarlet flame flood dragon, we may as well try our luck and see if it is another fire tribute flood dragon. As for the vast young bird, we've looked through all the markets in the south to find that only the High Sun Palace raised it. Where else would we get its plume feather? I have no choice but to risk provoking them. I'm not telling you that you shouldn't steal the plume, but why don't you deal with them out in the open instead? With your current mid-nascent soul cultivation and the rare treasures in your possession, they might be willing to sell it with consideration of your might. Monarch Soul Divergence said with a chuckle. Han Li let out a cold laugh and said, Stop joking, senior. An exchange will require both sides to have nearly equivalent strength. I am only a mid-nascent soul cultivator and they have a late-nascent soul cultivator in their ranks. How could a junior like me catch their attention? Furthermore, the High Sun Palace's 2 vast young birds are considered a legacy of theirs. They wouldn't allow me to pluck its feather and cause a great decrease in its cultivation. If I brought out lowly treasures, they wouldn't be valuable enough to be worthy of their consideration, but if I brought out rare treasures instead, they would be tempted to kill me over it. Since I am a mere vagrant cultivator, they don't need to give me much consideration given the scope of their power. I am not willing to risk my safety over their whims. If I were a late-nascent soul cultivator, I might be willing to give it a try. Monarch Soul Divergence pondered in silence for a spell and said, Your words are reasonable. However, you've been wandering around the edge of the mountain range for over 10 days. Could it be you're waiting for a vast young bird to fly out? But from your actions, it also seems like you're looking for something. Just what are you planning? Han Li's eyes wavered and he smiled, saying, It's nothing. I'm only finding a suitable place to put down a trap. Set up a trap? Since you dared to act against the High Sun Palace, it is right to be stealthy. Tell me about your plans. Han Li glanced at the heart of the mountain range and chuckled. Wait until I find a suitable location and I'll tell you about it in detail. They have a larger and a smaller vast young bird. I wonder which one is more suitable to trap. Monarch Soul Divergence lazily asked, What's the point of talking about it? I hear the larger vast young bird is a grade 8 demon bird. Do you think you'll be able to capture it in a short amount of time? Han Li pondered for a moment and then nodded. That's right. The only reason why birds of antiquity would remain under the control of the High Sun Palace is because their intelligence is difficult to awaken and they are unable to take human form in the mortal realm. I hear the smaller of the 2 birds should be weaker by an entire grade, so it should be easier to deal with. With a regretful tone, Monarch Soul Divergence mentioned, But if you use the plume of the grade 8 vast young bird to refine the Tri-Flame fan, its might would be even greater. Han Li shook his head. Forget it. Nothing in this world is perfect. It is simply too dangerous to deal with the grade 8 vast young bird. In the extra time it would take, I fear I would alarm many High Sun Palace disciples. I don't want to repeat what happened in the soaring sky plains. Monarch Soul Divergence chuckled. Yes, that sounds right. But regardless of their size, they will only occasionally fly out from the High Sun Palace. How do you plan on capturing one of the birds? Han Li coldly smiled and said, Don't worry. I've already used the Dream Tear technique on one of their disciples. Fearing that the birds would become difficult to control in prolonged confinement, the sect releases the birds every month to stretch their wings. This will be our opportunity to act. Since you already know this, there is no use for any of my advice. However, you mustn't take too long and miss the trade fair at the Jin Empire's capital city. It should have many materials that I'm missing for my puppet body. Monarch Soul Divergence warned. The capital trade fair is one of the 3 great trade fairs in the Jin Empire and only occurs once every 10 years. I wouldn't want to miss it in any case. When this is done, I'll hurry over to the Empire capital and afterwards, we'll have to find those flood dragons on the Empire's east shore. Han Li said his future plans with a calm tone. That will do. But nevertheless, your recent actions have earned my respect. I originally believed you would need at least 4 years in order to reach your current collection of materials. I didn't think that you'd be able to effectively tackle the problem from 2 angles. With your hidden and open methods, you were able to gather most of the items you needed in only a single year. Your decisiveness to act are beyond my expectations. It was clear from Monarch Soul Divergence's voice that he was greatly satisfied with Han Li's methods. Han Li paused for a moment as his expression stirred. He then said, I also wish to use a slower, more reliable method to look for materials, but time was limited. Although Senior's primal soul has the support of the soul-nurturing wood, its effects are clearly too weak. If I wish to create your nascent soul-grade puppet body, I'll need to be as quick as possible. After a wry chuckle, Monarch Soul Divergence helplessly said, So you were being considerate. I knew I couldn't hide it from you. I can only last 3 or 4 years at most. My primal soul is on the verge of scattering. But at the speed that you're collecting materials, I have high hopes my puppet body will be refined before I reincarnate. After letting out a long sigh, Han Li said with a serious tone, Ever since I've met Senior, you've helped me many times. I'm not a heartless person and I've committed these acts of kindness to memory. I will do my utmost to fulfill your dreams. Deeply touched, Monarch Soul Divergence also let out a sigh and honestly said, In truth, I was only helping you in self-preservation. After all, if I were to fall into someone else's hands, I feared that nothing good would come of it. Han Li smiled and in a flash of azure light, his body disappeared in the wind. 2 days later, Han Li discovered a small valley filled with peach trees. The valley was stained pink from the blooming peach blossoms that littered it. Han Li floated above the valley and observed it in its entirety, then releasing his spiritual sense to cover a 50-kilometer area. With an expression of satisfaction, he flew to the center of the peach tree forest and muttered, Not bad, this place is quite remote and there are no High Sun Palace cultivators stationed nearby. This valley is ideal to place down a spell formation. Then without another word, Han Li began to set himself to work. In a single breath, 8 sets of various formation flags and plates were placed in the forest. 5 of these formations were meant to conceal auras and isolate chi from the outside, while 3 of them meant to restrain the spell formation. Additionally, he placed down an illusion formation, covering the true appearance of most of the forest. Monarch Soul Divergence viewed this with great curiosity, but barely managed to keep himself from asking any questions. With everything set up, Han Li went to the center of the peach tree forest and sat down cross-legged, entering a meditative state. Three days passed and Han Li stirred awake from meditation. He raised his head toward the night sky and a moonlight stone appeared in his hand. He flung it into the air and sparkles of moonlight illuminated the nearby peach trees. Without the slightest noise, he then took out a meter chunk of red coral and tossed it down before planting rainbow skirt grass on top of it. This is the method that you've prepared? Although he had seen Han Li feed the gold-devouring beetles with the grass to miraculous effect, he was very baffled to see it used now. When Han Li heard this question, he smiled and said, In truth, this grass has another name, the demon lure grass. Senior should know what I plan on using it for. Demon lure grass? Could it be? Monarch Soul Divergence suddenly dawned with realization. That's right. In 6 days the smaller vast young bird will be released, and the grass will bloom as well, releasing its bewitching scent. When the time comes. Han Li coldly snickered. Feng Chu was mid-foundation establishment High Sun Palace cultivator. There were nearly 1,000 of his kind that could be found in the entirety of the sect. It was reasonable to say that he was an unremarkable character, but in truth, this was quite the opposite. Let alone other foundation establishment cultivators, even core formation stage martial seniors had to treat him politely, and even when benefits arose in the palace, he would be the first foundation establishment disciple to be considered. Feng Chu's unusually high standing in the High Sun Palace was something he was rather proud of, though this was all due to his duties as the caretaker for the sect's smaller vast young bird. He possessed an innate special ability to communicate with birds, and were it not for this rare and irreplaceable talent, he wouldn't have been assigned this task. After all, as the bird's caretaker, he had a certain degree of control over it, something that was heavily valued by the sect. Although this was the weaker of the two sex vast young birds, it was still able to easily defeat late core formation cultivators and directly pursue nascent soul cultivators. It was no wonder the bird was held with such reverence. Over the 30 years Feng Chu had cared for the bird, he would stay next to it at all times, even cut his cultivation time to follow after the spirit bird when it would liberate its wings, during which not a single problem arose. As this was only another routine flight, he didn't feel the need to be worried. With the surrounding 50,000 kilometers of the Heaven Peak mountain range were all under the control of the High Sun Palace, what could possibly happen? With those leisurely thoughts in mind, he distantly followed after the vast young bird on an early morning. The vast young bird was only about 3 meters long, but its long tail feathers made up over half of its length. From a distance, the bird appeared like a huge peacock, but there wasn't one with such beautiful fire-red feathers. The bird was ecstatic. After it was released from the restrictions of the High Sun Palace, it flapped its fire-red wings and continuously flew circles in the sky to ensure no one was following it. With ordinary methods, Feng Chu wouldn't have been able to conceal himself from the bird's spiritual sense, but he was using a qi concealment talisman that the sect had specially refined. As such, he was able to follow after the bird without any fear of being discovered in spite his shallow cultivation. When the bird let out a clear cry, Feng Chu wore a knowing smile. He had spent a long time with it and knew the vast young bird was extremely happy at the moment. After this trip, the bird would be docile for the next half-month. As a result, the bird calmly circled the sky above the High Sun Palace for a long while before flying away. Feng Chu didn't feel the slightest concern. But just after he gave pursuit, he discovered something incredibly shocking. He saw a few low-grade demon beasts emerge from well-hidden burrows and flew off in the same direction as the vast young bird with reckless abandon. In a short amount of time, it formed a wave of demon beasts, some of which were rarely ever seen. However, Feng Chu had nothing to fear as the sect's high-grade cultivators had already eliminated all high-grade demon beasts from the mountain that could pose a threat to the vast young birds. Regardless, Feng Chu felt even more uneasy after seeing that the mountain beast had also lost control. In a hidden valley thousands of kilometers away, Han Li was sitting cross-legged on the ground. There was a chunk of coral in front of him along with rainbow skirt grass wrapped in red light. At that moment, Han Li's attention wasn't focused on the grass, but the situation outside of the peach tree forest inside the valley. Several tens of low-grade spirit beasts had already gathered near the valley's restrictions, attempting to break through with all their power for the 6-leaved rainbow skirt grass inside. Han Li was truly surprised by the number of low-grade spirit beasts in the Heaven Peak mountain range. However, he didn't pay them much regard and instead closed his eyes, facing the direction of the High Sun Palace. He reckoned the potency of the rainbow skirt grass would be enough to lure that grade 7 bird over. Furthermore, its speed should be much faster than ordinary magic treasures. It shouldn't be long before it arrives. Shortly after, Han Li's calm expression stirred and he opened his eyes. With a hand gesture and a snort, he suddenly released several magic seals from his hands, activating the outermost illusion formation in the valley. A layer of white light promptly emerged from the ground and instantly concealed the forest from view. At that moment, the wild and savage roars could be heard along with the clear cry of a bird. A huge yellow ball of light and a scarlet fireball simultaneously arrived above the valley, clearly bewitched by the rainbow skirt grass. When Han Li saw this, he let out a yelp and revealed an astonished expression. Han Li found 2 overbearing presences appear in front of the valley. The fireball faintly contained the silhouette of a bird. As for the ball of yellow light, it appeared to be a demon beast rolled up in a ball. Its body was covered in a thick, tough yellow hide. It was wrinkled and folded as if it were a layer of armor. And from within its fat body poked out a sharp rat's head and a slender tail. It appeared to be a huge demon mouse variant. What manner of strange demon beast is this? Han Li asked. An armored earth dragon, what an extremely rare spirit beast. Monarch Soul Divergence shouted with delight. It's widely known for its defensive prowess and ability to find treasures. It is fortunate that it has appeared before you. Oh, it's that beast? I had a feeling I recognized it. As soon as Han Li spoke, the 2 demon beasts charged into the valley's white mist one after another, aiming to acquire the rainbow skirt grass underneath within. In response, he summoned a green formation plate into his hand. With a slap, the plate glowed with bright light, raising the outermost layers of the valley's restrictions and trapping the vast young bird in the lead. The ball of yellow light hastily followed after it, but was blocked once the spell formation was activated. The armored earth dragon was furiously alarmed from the sudden obstruction, and its body shimmered with yellow light, expanding to the size of 24 meters. Layers upon layers of gray plate emerged from its body, and it rolled into a ball before fiercely knocking against the barrier. With a huge bang, the strike destroyed the two outermost layers of the restrictions. After a pause, the beast continued to strike away at the remaining restrictions. This short delay gave Hanli ample time to restrain the vast young bird. After the bird collided against the restrictions, it waved its wings and scattered scarlet fireballs all around it, dispersing most of the mist below it and revealing the forest filled with blooming peach trees. With a quick scan of its eyes, it quickly spotted Hanli and the source of its bewitchment, the rainbow skirt grass. Even without a fully developed intelligence, Hanli's unconcealed mid-nascent soul cultivation invoked fear in the bird. It circled above, not daring to stoop too low, but unable to escape the incredibly powerful enticement of the rainbow skirt grass. As the bird hesitated, Hanli expressionlessly raised his hand and a black talisman shot out. In a flicker of black light, the talisman turned into a black ghost claw and reached out to grab the vast young bird. The bird was deeply shocked, and without another thought, it released over 30 fist-sized fireballs with a flap of its wings. They ruptured against the ghost claw, covering the black light with raging inferno and disabling it for the time being. Astonished, Hanli soon formed an incantation gesture with his hands, and silver wings emerged from his back. With a ring of thunder, he disappeared without a trace, followed by his reappearance in a flash of silver light 10 meters above the bird's head. He then clapped his hands together with a gloomy expression before separating them to release two dense bolts of golden lightning from his palms, only for them to rupture midair and form a huge net of lightning. Devoting its attention on blocking the black ghost claw, the vast young bird was completely caught off guard, and was trapped underneath the cackling net of lightning. In a panic, it shook its body to shed off a few of its feathers, turning into a dense fiery blaze that struck the net of lightning, followed by a chain of explosions. A cold glint appeared in Hanli's eyes when he saw this, and he shook his wrist, uttering, "Restrain." The large net of lightning wildly flashed and pushed against the flames as it closed in. In a brilliant display of golden light, the vast young bird was restrained by the thick, dense net of lightning. Helpless, it could only shake all of its tail feathers off in a flicker of red light. These feathers were linked to its body's essence and blood vessels. If they were forcefully pulled out, its body would suffer quite a bit of damage. If it took the initiative to abandon them, it would still suffer a loss of strength, but it could avoid unnecessary injuries. Hanli was delighted to see this, and he caught all of the feathers in his hand. Then he took out a jade box he had prepared and quickly placed them inside. With the lid of the box sealed with several talismans, he carefully put it away in his storage pouch. With that done, he placed his hand on top of the vast young bird's head and poured a bit of spiritual power into it, knocking it unconscious. He let out a smile and turned his attention to the frozen armored earth dragon. Although the demon beast was trapped in a thick layer of ice, it was still conscious. As such, its small eyes betrayed terror when it saw that Hanli had turned his attention toward him. Hanli then flew down in a streak of azure light. A quarter hour later, a band of brilliant gold light arrived above the valley at the speed of lightning. It circled once in the air before fading away to reveal the old purple-robed woman that was previously in the High Sun Palace's secret hall. At her side stood an extremely solemn Feng Chu, who stifled his breath in an attempt to attract less attention. At that moment, the restrictions covering the blooming peach tree forest in the valley had completely disappeared. There was simply an unconscious vast young bird that had its tail feathers plucked lying beneath a tree. When the old woman saw this, she swept her spiritual sense across it in alarm. Although she found that the bird had suffered a loss in strength from its missing tail feathers, she grew relaxed. But after she took another look at the bird's rear, anger bloomed in her heart. "Take a look at the bird and see if you can awaken it," the old woman commanded with a serious tone. When Feng Chu heard this, he repeatedly nodded in a display of complete obedience and hurriedly flew down. If it weren't for the High Sun Palace's ancestor finding him along the way, he wouldn't have been able to reach this location at this speed. The old woman was looking around her, and with some thought she closed her eyes and slowly released her spiritual sense to search for the impudent culprit of this act. A short moment later, her expression changed as if she suddenly found something. She hurriedly barked orders to Feng Chu down below and hurriedly flew off in a golden streak of light. Once she was over 100 kilometers away, she stopped a strange-looking cultivator that was about to leave the mountain range. Brimming with suspicion, the old woman coldly asked, "Look who I've found, it's fellow Taoist Ma of the Devilwood sect. Why aren't you peacefully cultivating at your sect? Why have you stealthily arrived at our Heaven Peak mountain range? Was the demon beast's uproar your doing?" She was speaking to a masked yellow-robed cultivator. His eyes had an inhuman golden glow. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.